The September auction at the Helena courthouse always drew a crowd. Land deals in Montana territory were becoming the new gold rush of 18s, and everyone knew it. The real wealth wasn't in the gold veins that had built the town, but in the sprawling acres surrounding it, particularly those with water rights. Thatcher Voss stood near the front of the crowded room, his tailored suit and gold watch chain marking him as different from the rough-hewn ranchers and shopkeepers. At 40, Voss carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd never heard the word no, and wouldn't recognize it if he did. His father's bank held the mortgages on half the businesses in town and foreclosed on more land than most men would see in a lifetime. Next parcel, announced Judge Morrison, adjusting his spectacles. The Cole Ranch, 200 acres with Clear Creek running through the eastern section. Opening bid at $800. Thatcher smiled. He'd been waiting for this particular auction for months. The Cole Ranch wasn't just another piece of land. It was strategically positioned between Helena and the planned railroad extension. Whoever controlled that water would control the future development of the entire eastern valley. 800, called a cattle buyer from the back. 900, countered Thatcher smoothly. 1,000, came another voice. Thatcher nodded slightly. 1,200. The room fell quiet. $1,200 was more than most men earned in 2 years. Judge Morrison raised his gavel, satisfaction evident on his face. 1,200 going once. This auction cannot proceed. The voice cut through the silence like a knife. Every head turned toward the courthouse doors, where a woman in black stood resolute. Despite the September heat, she wore a high-necked dress of dark wool, her posture rigid with determination. Thatcher felt a flash of irritation. Vanessa Cole, the widow. Mrs. Cole, Judge Morrison said with poorly concealed impatience, this court has already addressed your concerns. You've addressed nothing, she replied, walking forward. The crowd parted before her, murmurs rippling through the room. My husband's will expressly forbids the sale of that land. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this in private. There's nothing to discuss that can't be said here. Vanessa's voice carried clearly. I have the will. I have the deed. That land is not for sale. Thatcher stepped forward. The issue, Mrs. Cole, is that there are conditions to your inheritance. Conditions that cannot be met. The judge rapped his gavel. Court will recess for 15 minutes. Mrs. Cole, Mr. Voss, my chambers. As the crowd dispersed into gossiping clusters, Vanessa Cole held her ground, eyes locked on Thatcher Voss with undisguised contempt. Judge Morrison's chambers smelled of leather-bound books and stale cigar smoke. He settled behind his oak desk, leaving Vanessa and Thatcher standing like schoolchildren, awaiting punishment. Mrs. Cole, he began, we've been through this. Your husband's will is quite specific. Then honor it, she said. The judge sighed, reaching for a document case. Section 4, paragraph 2. I leave all lands, holdings, and property to my wife, Vanessa Cole, on the condition that she bear a male heir within 1 year of my passing. Should this condition not be met, the land shall be sold at auction, with proceeds divided between my wife and my brother's family in Ohio. Ralston's brother hasn't set foot in Montana in 15 years, Vanessa said. He didn't even attend the funeral. Nevertheless, the will is binding. Judge Morrison peered at her over his spectacles. Mr. Cole died 5 months ago. That gives you 7 months to fulfill the condition. Vanessa stiffened. That's impossible, and you know it. Thatcher stepped forward, his voice smooth as silk. If I might offer a solution, Judge, the Voss Bank would be willing to purchase Mrs. Cole's interest directly. A fair price with no need for auction. It would spare her further embarrassment. How considerate of you, Vanessa said coldly. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Voss, you should know that Mrs. Cole has already declined similar offers. I'm aware, Thatcher said. I'm also aware that the Cole Ranch is carrying considerable debt to several businesses in town. Debts that are now coming due. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? Simply that I've acquired those debts, Thatcher replied with a slight smile. As a business precaution. The message was clear. Thatcher Voss was closing the noose. Judge Morrison gathered the papers. The auction will be postponed for 7 months. If by then Mrs. Cole has not met the conditions specified in her husband's will. The land will be sold as directed. He fixed Vanessa with a stern look. Court adjourned. Vanessa turned to leave, but Thatcher blocked her path. 7 months is a long time to struggle alone, Mrs. Cole, he said quietly. Why prolong the inevitable? Accept my offer now. Walk away with dignity and enough money to start fresh elsewhere. She met his gaze unflinchingly. That land is my home, Mr. Voss. I'm not leaving it. Your husband felt differently, Thatcher replied. He clearly planned for a future without you on that land. Ralston never doubted me. Then why the condition? Thatcher's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps he knew something you didn't. Vanessa pushed past him, but his voice followed her to the door. You truly believe you'll find a husband and bear a child in 7 months? At your age? Be realistic, Mrs. Cole. Time isn't on your side. She paused at the doorway, her back still turned to him. Just like Ralston's illness wasn't on his side? The words hung in the air between them. Strange how quickly consumption took him. Almost unnatural. Thatcher's smile faded. Careful, Mrs. Cole. That sounds dangerously like an accusation. She left without another word, but the tension remained, thick enough to cut with a knife. Vanessa rode hard across the plains, pushing her mare faster than was wise in the afternoon heat. 5 miles outside Helena, she finally slowed, allowing both herself and the horse to breathe. The distant outline of the Cole Ranch appeared on the horizon, modest compared to the sprawling cattle operations further north. But it was home. Home. The word caught in her throat. 5 months ago, it had been their home, hers and Ralston's. Now it was a battleground, and she was losing. Ralston Cole had been 15 years her senior, a fact that had caused gossip when they married. Vanessa had been 25 then, already considered a spinster after the fever epidemic claimed her parents and left her alone. Ralston had offered her stability, respect, and eventually a genuine affection that deepened with time. They tried for children, year after year, but none came. Some things aren't meant to be, Van, he'd said one night, holding her as she cried after another monthly disappointment. We have each other. We have the land. That's enough. Only it hadn't been enough, apparently, not when he'd written that will. As she approached the ranch, Vanessa noticed smoke rising from behind the main house. For one terrifying moment, she feared fire, but then recognized the familiar figure of Almeida Rowe tending a washing pot in the yard. Almeida, twice widowed at 42, lived 3 miles south but appeared at the Cole Ranch with reliable regularity since Ralston's death. She claimed it was to check on things, but Vanessa suspected the older woman simply understood the crushing weight of solitude. You're back early, Almeida called as Vanessa dismounted. Don't tell me those jackals at the bank changed their minds about being decent. The auction's postponed, Vanessa said, leading her horse to the water trough. For now. Almeida wiped her hands on her apron. Something in your face tells me that's not good news. 7 months, Vanessa replied, her voice hollow. Judge Morrison is enforcing Ralston's will. I have 7 months to bear a son or lose everything. Almeida let out a low whistle. Ralston Cole may have been a good man in life, but that will of his is pure devilment. She studied Vanessa's face. What did Voss have to say about it? He offered to buy me out, again. Vanessa unsaddled her horse with practiced movements. Said it would spare me embarrassment. Generous of him, Almeida said dryly, especially since he's the one creating the embarrassment. Vanessa paused. What do you mean? You think it's coincidence that Thatcher Voss has been buying up every debt and note connected to this ranch? He wants this land, and he's not particular about how he gets it. Vanessa had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach knot. What would he want with a modest ranch like this? Water, Almeida said simply. Clear Creek runs through your east section year-round. With the railroad coming, whoever controls water controls everything. Voss knows that. So does Ralston's will, Vanessa said bitterly. A male heir within a year of his death, or everything goes to auction. Where Voss will be waiting with the highest bid, Almeida finished. Vanessa slumped against the barn door. I can't marry and bear a child in 7 months. It's impossible. Almeida was quiet for a long moment, her weathered face thoughtful. Finally, she said, You don't need a husband, Vanessa. What? You don't need a husband, Almeida repeated, more firmly this time. You just need a man who knows what to do and can do it before Voss takes your fence posts. Vanessa stared at her, uncomprehending at first, then shocked as the meaning became clear. Almeida, I couldn't possibly. Couldn't and shouldn't are two different things, Almeida cut in. You think every child born in this territory came from a church wedding? Half the women in town were showing before the preacher finished his vows. My reputation. What about your ranch? Almeida countered. Besides, once you've got a baby on your hip, folks forget how you got there. They're too busy gossiping about the next scandal. Vanessa shook her head. This is madness. Madness is losing your home because you are too proud to bend the rules a little. Almeida's voice softened. Ralston left you that land because he loved you. You think he'd want you to lose it over some fool notion of propriety? The mention of Ralston stung. He'd been a good husband, quiet and steady. They'd tried for children, but it never happened. Now she wondered if it had been his failing rather than hers. Even if I agreed to this insane plan, Vanessa said slowly, how would I even? That's where planning comes in. Almeida pulled a scrap of paper from her apron. I've been thinking about the men in town. We need someone reliable, healthy, and discreet. Can't have word spreading faster than honey on a hot biscuit. You've made a list? Vanessa asked, incredulous. Started one, Almeida admitted, squinting at her handwriting. Crawford Boone, the blacksmith, strong as an ox, arms like tree trunks, could probably lift you clean off the ground. I'm not discussing this. Then there's Sutton Hale, Almeida continued, undeterred. He's the sheriff, responsible sort, knows how to keep secrets. Stop, Vanessa groaned, covering her face. Just stop. Foster Grady is another option. Young, works at the livery stable. Quiet type, probably wouldn't ask too many questions. I need time to think, Vanessa said, overwhelmed. Almeida folded the paper and tucked it away. Time's one thing you don't have much of, honey, but I'll give you a few days to get used to the idea. Her eyes met Vanessa's, suddenly serious. Just remember, come next March, you'll either be holding your baby or packing your bags. As Almeida gathered her washing and prepared to leave, she paused as if just remembering something. You know, there's one name I didn't mention. Who? Vanessa asked wearily. That ranch hand of yours, Bridger. Almeida's expression was carefully neutral. Been working here 3 years now, stayed on even after Ralston died. Loyal, strong, keeps to himself. Bridger, Vanessa repeated, surprised. He's just a boy. 26 isn't a boy, Vanessa, and he's got more sense in his little finger than most men have in their whole bodies. Almeida mounted her horse, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. Ever wonder why he stayed on when he could find better pay elsewhere? Man doesn't stick around a struggling ranch out of loyalty to a dead employer. With that parting thought, she rode off, leaving Vanessa staring after her, the impossible plan taking reluctant shape in her mind. That evening, Vanessa found herself watching Bridger McCallan from the kitchen window as he mended a broken corral gate. How had she never really looked at him before? He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. His dark hair needed cutting, falling over his forehead as he concentrated on his task. Bridger had appeared at the ranch 3 years ago looking for work. Ralston had hired him on the spot, saying later that he recognized something in the young man's eyes. Someone who's seen the other side of hell and come back, was how he'd put it. Whatever Bridger had seen or done before arriving at the coal ranch, he never spoke of it. He worked hard, kept to himself, and somehow became an indispensable part of the operation. When Ralston took ill, Bridger had shouldered more responsibilities without being asked. When Ralston died, he'd stayed on, even though Vanessa could barely afford to pay him. She'd been grateful, certainly, but had she ever really seen him? Not as a ranch hand, not as another body to feed, but as a man. A sharp knock at the door startled her from these thoughts. She opened it to find Sheriff Sutton Hale standing on her porch, hat in hand. Evening, Mrs. Cole, he said, nodding respectfully. Heard there was some trouble at the auction today. News travels fast, she replied, stepping aside to let him enter. Small town, he said with a shrug. Wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine, Sheriff. Just postponing the inevitable, it seems. Hale's face softened with sympathy. Judge Morrison told me about the will's condition. Seems mighty unfair, if you don't mind my saying. Life often is, Vanessa said, pouring coffee for them both. Voss has been asking questions, Hale continued, accepting the cup, about your finances, about the ranch's condition. He wants my land. Hale nodded. He's not a man used to being denied. Be careful, Mrs. Cole. What can he do? The law is the law, even if it's not in my favor. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Just watch yourself. Voss has connections in Helena that go beyond banking. He served in the war, you know. Confederate officer. Made friends in places most folks don't think about. Before Vanessa could ask what he meant, the back door opened and Bridger entered, stopping short when he saw the sheriff. Evening, I saw, he said, his posture instantly alert. McAllen, Hale acknowledged. Just checking on Mrs. Cole after today's events. Bridger nodded, his eyes flicking between them. Everything all right? Fine, Vanessa assured him. The sheriff was just leaving. After Hale departed, Bridger remained in the kitchen, his tall frame somehow making the room feel smaller. I heard what happened in town, he said quietly. Vanessa tensed. From whom? People talk, especially to someone they don't really notice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Being invisible has advantages. What exactly did you hear? That Judge Morrison is enforcing Mr. Cole's will. That you need a son within 7 months or lose the ranch. His direct gaze met hers. And that Thatcher Voss is already counting this land as his. Vanessa felt suddenly exhausted. Then you know as much as I do. Bridger was silent for a moment, then said, I knew Mr. Cole was changing his will before he died. He asked me to fetch the lawyer from town. This was news to Vanessa. Did he tell you why? No, ma'am, not my place to ask. He hesitated, but he wasn't himself those last weeks. The sickness changed him, made him worry about things he'd never worried about before. Like ensuring his land wouldn't go to his wife. Vanessa couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. I don't believe that was his intention, Bridger said carefully. Mr. Cole loved this land, but he loved you more. Anyone could see that. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for the first time, Vanessa truly looked at Bridger McAllen. Not as her employee, but as a man who had known her husband, who had stayed when others would have left, who was in many ways the last connection to the life she'd had with Ralston. Why did you stay? She asked suddenly. After Ralston died. You could have found work elsewhere, probably for better pay. Bridger's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. This place feels like home, he said quietly. Never had that before. He glanced away. Didn't want to leave. His voice trailed off. Unless? Vanessa prompted. Unless you wanted me gone, he finished, meeting her gaze again. The simple honesty in his words caught her off guard. I've never wanted you gone. Good to know. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth, transforming his usually solemn features. Ranch wouldn't be the same without you running it. As he turned to leave, Vanessa found herself wondering if Almeida had been right. Had Bridger stayed for reasons beyond loyalty to Ralston? And more importantly, would he be willing to help her in the way she needed most? She pushed the thought away, ashamed of herself for even considering it. But as the kitchen door closed behind him, leaving her alone with the ticking clock on the mantel, Vanessa Cole knew her options were dwindling with every passing day. Outside, the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, indifferent to the desperate plans forming beneath them. Daddy. The sound of approaching riders pulled Vanessa from sleep just before dawn. Grabbing her husband's old shotgun from beside the bed, she moved to the window. 3 men on horseback were approaching the main house, their silhouettes dark against the gray pre-dawn light. She recognized the center rider immediately, Thatcher Voss. By the time she dressed and reached the porch, Bridger was already there, Winchester rifle held casually but ready in his hands. Morning, Mrs. Cole, Thatcher called, as if dropping by for tea. Apologies for the early hour, but business waits for no man. What do you want, Voss? She demanded. Thatcher dismounted, brushing dust from his fine coat. Just a friendly visit. He gestured to the 2 men flanking him. These gentlemen are from the Territorial Land Office. They're reviewing boundary claims in the area. There's nothing wrong with my boundaries, Vanessa said. The deed is clear. Ah, well, that's the issue. Thatcher produced a folded document. It seems there may be a discrepancy regarding the eastern section, specifically the portion containing Clear Creek. Bridger stepped forward. That creek's been part of Cole land since Ralston's father homesteaded here. It's in the original survey. Thatcher raised an eyebrow. And you are? Bridger McCallan. I work for Mrs. Cole. Well, Mr. McCallan, regardless of what you believe, these gentlemen need to conduct an official survey. Thatcher's smile didn't reach his eyes. Purely procedural. One of the men, neither of whom had territorial badges visible, spoke up. We'll need to examine the eastern boundary. Shouldn't take more than a day. You have no right, Vanessa began, but Thatcher cut her off. Actually, Mrs. Cole, they have every right. This is a territorial matter now. He handed her a paper that bore Judge Morrison's signature. Everything's in order. Vanessa took the document, rage building inside her. First you try to buy me out, then you try to auction my land, and now you're trying to steal my water rights? Thatcher's smile faded. I'm simply following legal procedures, Mrs. Cole. Unlike some, I respect the law. Like the law that gives me 7 months to meet my husband's condition? Vanessa shot back. Precisely. Thatcher remounted his horse. And how is that progressing? Found a husband willing to take on a struggling ranch and a woman of... He paused, his eyes deliberately traveling over her. Mature years? Before Vanessa could respond, Bridger stepped between them, his voice low and dangerous. You've delivered your message, Mr. Voss. Now I suggest you and your men leave. Something passed between the two men, a silent recognition, a measuring of worth. Thatcher's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to place Bridger in some distant memory. We'll be surveying the eastern boundary, he said finally. Stay out of our way. As they rode toward the creek, Bridger turned to Vanessa. He's not here for boundaries. He wants to see how desperate you are. He won't have to look hard, Vanessa admitted, the weight of her situation crashing down again. What am I going to do, Bridger? He studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. You need someone to stand with you against Voss, someone with legal standing. You mean a husband? Yes, ma'am, a husband. The word hung in the air between them, laden with implication. Are you offering? Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Bridger's expression didn't change, but his eyes, those quiet, observant eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing, held her steadily. If that's what it takes to save your ranch, he said simply. Yes. In that moment, with Thatcher Voss's men trespassing on her land and time slipping through her fingers like sand, Vanessa Cole made the decision that would change everything. Then I accept, she said. End of part 1, continuing to part 2. I've written the first part of your 22,000-word Western story following the detailed outline. This opening section, 4,400 words, establishes 1. A powerful hook with the courthouse auction scene. 2. The central conflict between Vanessa Cole and Thatcher Voss over the ranch land. The desperate condition of Ralston's will, requiring a male heir within a year, character introductions and motivations. Vanessa, Thatcher, Almeida, Bridger. 5. The historical backdrop of 1876 Montana Territory. The first marriage of convenience proposal from Bridger. The writing style incorporates cinematic storytelling techniques with scene transitions, visual descriptions, and dialogue that reveals character. I've used period-appropriate language and historical details to enhance authenticity for your 60-plus male American audience. I've ended part 1 with a strong cliffhanger. Vanessa accepting Bridger's marriage proposal to save her ranch, setting up the escalation of conflict in part 2. Would you like me to continue with part 2 now, or would you prefer to review this first section before proceeding? The news of Vanessa Cole's sudden engagement spread through Helena like wildfire. By sundown, it seemed everyone within 20 miles knew that the widow Cole had taken up with her ranch hand, a scandalous development that provided more gossip fodder than the last 3 church socials combined. Did you hear? Not even 6 months a widow. That young man's been living on her property this whole time. Ralston Cole must be turning in his grave. Vanessa heard none of it directly, but she didn't need to. The sideways glances when she visited the general store told her everything, as did the sudden silences that fell whenever she entered a room. Let them talk, Almeida advised when she visited the ranch a week after Vanessa's decision. They'd be talking no matter who you chose to marry. At least Bridger's already here and knows the operation. It's not a real marriage, Vanessa reminded her, keeping her voice low though they were alone in the kitchen. It's an arrangement. Almeida raised an eyebrow. Does he know that? Of course, it was his idea, remember? His idea to marry you, Almeida corrected. Did you specifically discuss that it's temporary? That once the baby's born, you are done with him? Vanessa frowned. Not in those exact words, but he must understand. It's a marriage of convenience, nothing more. Mm-hmm, Almeida hummed, unconvinced. Men aren't known for their subtlety, Vanessa. Might want to make sure you're both reading from the same page before you say those vows. The wedding itself was a modest affair, held in Preacher Davidson's parlor with only Almeida and Dr. Craven as witnesses. Davidson, a stern man with old-fashioned sensibilities, had initially refused to perform the ceremony. This union appears hastily arranged, he'd said when they approached him, his disapproval evident. Marriage is sacred, Mrs. Cole, not a business transaction. With all due respect, preacher, Bridger had replied, his voice steady, some of the best marriages start as partnerships. The rest comes with time. Something in Bridger's sincerity, or perhaps the generous donation they offered to the church building fund, eventually swayed the preacher. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional, but as Vanessa repeated her vows, she couldn't help but wonder what Ralston would think of her marrying a man she barely knew to save the land they'd shared. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Bridger's kiss was chaste, a brief touch of his lips to hers that left her strangely unsettled. This man was now her husband, yet she knew little about him beyond his work ethic and his silent dependability. That evening, back at the ranch, an awkward tension filled the house. Bridger moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse to the main house, but insisted on sleeping on the parlor sofa rather than sharing Ralston's, now their, bedroom. It's not proper yet, he said simply when she protested. There's time. Time. The word hung between them, laden with meaning. They both knew what the marriage required, what had to happen for the condition in Ralston's will to be met. But neither seemed ready to broach the subject directly. Instead, they fell into a routine of cautious politeness, working side by side during the day and retreating to separate spaces at night. Bridger continued his ranch duties while Vanessa managed the house and accounts, their professional relationship unchanged despite the gold bands they now wore. 2 weeks after the wedding, they rode into Helena together to file the marriage certificate at the county clerk's office. Vanessa felt the stares and heard the whispers, but Bridger's solid presence beside her made them easier to bear. As they exited the courthouse, a familiar figure blocked their path. Thatcher Voss, immaculate as always in his tailored suit, regarded them with cold amusement. Mrs. McCallan, he said, the new name dripping with mockery, or do you prefer to keep Cole? I'm never quite sure how these unconventional arrangements work. Mr. Voss, Vanessa acknowledged stiffly. Thatcher's gaze shifted to Bridger. Quite the promotion, McCallan, from hired hand to land owner in one convenient ceremony. I don't own anything, Bridger replied evenly. The ranch belongs to my wife. For now, Thatcher smiled thinly, but I understand congratulations may soon be in order. A marriage, potentially a child. You've been busy. The implication that he knew the details of Ralston's will and their plan to fulfill it sent a chill through Vanessa. Our personal matters aren't your concern, she said. On the contrary. Thatcher stepped closer. Everything in this territory is my concern, particularly when it involves valuable water rights that should rightfully belong to those who can develop them properly. Bridger shifted slightly, positioning himself between Vanessa and Thatcher. We've filed our marriage certificate, Mr. Voss. Any claim you thought you had on Cole land is gone. Thatcher's eyes narrowed, studying Bridger with new intensity. Have we met before, McCallan? Something about you seems familiar. I have one of those faces, Bridger said flatly. No, Thatcher mused. It's something else. He stepped back, adjusting his watch chain. No matter, we'll have plenty of time to get acquainted in the future. Helena is a small town, after all. As Thatcher walked away, Vanessa turned to Bridger. What was that about? Has he seen you before? Not that I recall, Bridger said, but something in his expression suggested otherwise. Let's go home, Vanessa. I don't like leaving the ranch unattended for too long. That evening, as they sat at the kitchen table reviewing the ranch's accounts, Vanessa found herself studying her new husband. In the lamplight, his features appeared more defined, the strong jaw, the small scar near his right temple, the way his hands, rough from work, moved with unexpected precision as he tallied figures. "You're good with numbers," she observed. Bridger glanced up. "Had some schooling before the war." It was the first personal detail he had offered since their marriage. "Where?" she asked. He hesitated. "Ohio. My father wanted me to take over his store, made sure I could manage accounts." "But you didn't. Take over the store, I mean." "No." His expression closed again. "The war changed things. Changed me." "Which side?" Vanessa asked quietly. "Union." His finger traced a figure on the ledger. 107th Ohio Infantry, then transferred to Sherman's Scouts. "Ralston never mentioned you fought." Bridger's mouth tightened. "Most men who survive don't talk about it. Some things are better left buried." "Is that why you came west? To bury the past?" He met her gaze directly, something unreadable in his eyes. "Isn't that why most people come here?" The question hung in the air, personal yet universal. Before she could respond, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. Bridger rose, hand instinctively moving toward the rifle prop by the door. "Stay here," Hunt instructed, his entire demeanor shifting from contemplative to alert in an instant. Vanessa heard murmured voices, then Bridger returned with Sheriff Hale following behind. "Evening, Mrs. Cole. Forgive me, Mrs. McCallan," Hale corrected himself. "Sorry to disturb you folks, but there's been some trouble I thought you should know about." "What kind of trouble?" Vanessa asked. "Your eastern boundary markers have been moved," Hale said. "Jasper Miller was hunting yesterday and noticed they'd been shifted about half a mile west. That would put Clear Creek outside your property line." Bridger's face darkened. "Those surveyors Voss brought." "Likely," Hale agreed, "but without proof there's not much I can do officially. Territory law says boundary disputes go through the land office in Helena." "Where Voss has influence," Vanessa concluded. The sheriff nodded grimly. "I've known Thatcher Voss a long time. He doesn't make idle threats, and he doesn't lose gracefully. Whatever game he's playing, it's just beginning." After Hale departed, Vanessa and Bridger rode out to inspect the boundary markers, finding them indeed moved inward from where they'd stood for 20 years. "This is how he'll try to take the ranch," Bridger said, dismounting to examine the displaced stone marker. "If he can't get it through the will's condition, he'll claim the creek was never part of coal land to begin with." "Can he do that? Change boundaries that have been established for decades?" Bridger's expression was grim. "With enough money and the right officials, a man can redraw the whole territory if he wants to." "Then we fight him," Vanessa said, a new determination hardening her voice. "We'll get the original survey maps from the land office, find witnesses who remember where the markers have always been." Bridger regarded her with something like admiration. "You're not giving up easily." "This land is all I have left," she replied. "All Ralston left me. I won't let Voss steal it through trickery." "Not all Ralston left you," Bridger corrected quietly. "He left you with me too." The simple statement caught Vanessa off guard. In the gathering dusk, with the vast Montana sky stretching above them and the disputed land spreading around them, Bridger McCallan suddenly seemed different. Not just a convenient solution to her problem, but a man with his own story, his own reasons for being here. "Why did you really stay?" she asked. "After Ralston died. The truth this time." Bridger was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally he said, "I owe Ralston my life, not figuratively, literally." He turned away, his gaze sweeping over the distant mountains. 3 years ago I was riding north from Bannack. Got ambushed by road agents. They took my horse, my gear, shot me, and left me for dead in a ravine." Vanessa remembered the scar she'd glimpsed on his shoulder when he was repairing the barn roof last summer, an angry pucker of flesh that spoke of violence. "Ralston found me," Bridger continued. "He was coming back from a cattle sale. Heard the shots, investigated, and found me bleeding out. Brought me here, and you tended me for 2 weeks while the fever ran its course." "I don't remember," Vanessa said, confused. "You wouldn't. You never saw my face. Ralston kept me in the old line shack, away from the main house. Said it was better that way, fewer questions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You'd bring food and fresh bandages, but I was mostly unconscious those first days." "Why would Ralston hide you?" Bridger turned back to her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Because I was being hunted. Not just by the road agents, but by others. Men from my past. Ralston knew that somehow. He never asked for details, just offered me a place to heal and then a bomb where I could stay invisible. And now you're marrying his widow to repay that debt, Vanessa concluded, the pieces falling into place. That's how it started, Bridger admitted. A debt that needed paying, but it's become more than that. What do you mean? Before he could answer, the distant sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. 3 riders were approaching from the direction of Helena, moving fast. Back to the house, Bridger ordered, suddenly alert. Now. As they galloped back, Vanessa's mind raced with questions. Who was Bridger McCallan really? What past was he running from? And what did he mean when he said his reasons for marrying her had become more than repaying a debt? The riders reached the ranch yard just as they did. Vanessa recognized John Lockhart, owner of the largest spread in the county, accompanied by 2 of his men. Lockhart was in his 50s, a gruff veteran of both the Mexican and Civil Wars who rarely involved himself in his neighbors' affairs. McCallan, he called gruffly. Need a word. Bridger dismounted, his posture cautious. Mr. Lockhart, something wrong? Plenty, Lockhart grunted. But not here, private matter. Bridger glanced at Vanessa, who nodded slightly. Go ahead, I'll see to the horses. The men moved toward the barn, voices lowered. Vanessa led the horses to the corral, then slipped quietly along the barn's outer wall, positioning herself near an open window where she could overhear their conversation. Offering $20 a head over market, Lockhart was saying, but only to certain ranchers. Cole or McCallan Ranch now isn't on the list. Voss? Bridger asked. His new cattle company, Lockhart confirmed, buying up stock all over the territory, but blacklisting anyone who crosses him. He's making it damned hard for small operators to sell their beef. Why are you telling me this? Bridger's voice was cautious. There was a pause, then Lockhart said, Man came asking about you in town yesterday. Well-dressed fellow, Eastern accent, calling you by a different name. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meaning. What name? Bridger finally asked, his voice flat. Montgomery, James Montgomery. Vanessa's breath caught. Montgomery? Who was James Montgomery? What did you tell him, Bridger, or was it Montgomery? Asked. Nothing, Lockhart said, but I served with a Lieutenant James Montgomery in the 107th Ohio. Good officer, disappeared after Atlanta. Thought he'd been killed until I spotted him breaking horses on my neighbor's ranch 3 years ago. Another long silence. I don't know what you're running from, son, Lockhart continued, but Thatcher Voss is turning this territory upside down looking for you, not just to squeeze your ranch. He wants you specifically. Did Ralston know? Bridger's voice was barely audible. Cole? Hell, he's the one who asked me to hire you that first year. Said you needed to disappear for a while. Lockhart's voice softened slightly. Ralston Cole saved more than a few men's lives during the war. Seems he kept up the habit afterward. Vanessa felt dizzy with revelation. Ralston had known all along who Bridger really was, had deliberately hidden him, had even arranged employment for him elsewhere before bringing him to their ranch. Why, what connection did her quiet, steady husband have to this mysterious man with 2 names? Voss served as well, Lockhart was saying, Confederate cavalry officer, captured near Atlanta in '64. By Sherman's scouts, Bridger or Montgomery confirmed softly. By you specifically, if rumors are true, Lockhart said. Man doesn't forget something like that, especially a proud Southerner like Voss. That was a lifetime ago. Not to him, apparently. Lockhart's voice hardened. Watch yourself, Lieutenant, and watch your wife. Voss isn't just after land anymore. This is personal. When Vanessa returned to the house, she found Bridger sitting at the kitchen table, a small metal object gleaming before him. As she approached, she recognized it, a tarnished silver lieutenant's bar. James Montgomery, she said quietly. Bridger looked up, unsurprised that she'd overheard. A name I haven't used in a long time. Why, what happened in Atlanta? He closed his hand around the silver bar. I captured Thatcher Voss behind enemy lines. He was carrying documents, battle plans, troop movements, valuable intelligence. That would make you a hero, not a fugitive. Bridger's laugh was hollow. There's more to the story, always is. He stood, pocketing the lieutenant's bar. I need to check the north pasture fence before dark. You're not going to explain? After everything that's happened? He paused at the door, his back to her. Some ghosts are better left undisturbed, Vanessa, for both our sakes. As the door closed behind him, Vanessa was left with more questions than answers. Who was the man she'd married? What had happened during that war that made him hide his identity? And how was Ralston connected to it all? The diary. The thought came suddenly, clear as a bell. Ralston had kept a leather-bound journal for years, recording everything from cattle sales to personal thoughts. If he'd known Bridger's true identity, if he'd deliberately brought him to the ranch, perhaps he'd written about it. The small trunk at the foot of their bed contained Ralston's personal effects, things she'd packed away after his death, too painful to examine then. Now she pulled it out and began searching through the contents. Letters, a pocket watch, a daguerreotype of his parents, and finally, at the bottom, the worn leather journal. As daylight faded, Vanessa lit the lamp and began to read. April 18th, 1873. Montgomery arrived today looking half dead and fully haunted. The wound is bad, infection setting in. Van tended him without questions, bless her. Told her he's a drifter caught by road agents. Close enough to truth? The war follows us all west, it seems. Even here, even now, said. April 30th, 1873. M, improving, fever broken. Spoke lucidly today about Ohio, about the store his father kept. Reminds me of myself at that age. Running from memories no man should carry. Offered him work once he's healed. He has nowhere else to go, and Voss is still hunting for the Yankee lieutenant who captured him. Best M stays hidden a while longer. Vanessa flipped through the pages, scanning entries until another caught her eye. January 15th, 1874. Lockhart reports M doing well at his place, though keeping to himself. Better that way. Less chance of being recognized. Voss making noise about water rights again. Man never forgets a slight, whether in war or business. Must speak with Judge Morrison about securing our claim to Clear Creek more formally. Her hands trembled as she turned to entries from the final months of Ralston's life. November 3rd, 1875. Cough worsening. Dr. C says consumption, but progressing unusually fast. Never seen it take hold so quickly, he says. Had strange visit from Voss yesterday. Came alone, ostensibly about buying cattle. Seemed more interested in touring the ranch, asking about hired help. Looking for someone, I suspect. Offered tea, which he declined. Left his own flask on the table when he departed. A gesture of friendship. Buried it behind the barn. Trust that man less than a rattlesnake in a nursery. November 10th, 1875. Weaker today. Something not right about this illness. Burns differently than consumption should. Change my will. Van will think it betrayal, but it's protection. Condition of male heir ensures she'll need to remarry quickly, hopefully to M, who I've brought back from Lockhart's. Man has honor, strength, and owes me life debt. Will protect her and land from Voss when I'm gone. Suspect I was poisoned. No proof, but timing of Voss visit and sudden illness too coincidental. If true, he'll try again with Van once I'm gone. She needs protector who understands the danger. God forgive me for manipulation, but I see no other way to ensure their safety and alliance. The journal slipped from Vanessa's fingers, landing with a dull thud on the floor. Ralston had suspected poison, had believed Thatcher Voss had murdered him, and he'd changed his will not to disinherit her, but to force her to find protection through remarriage. He'd even chosen her protector. Bridger McCallan, the man whose life he'd saved. The man who was really Lieutenant James Montgomery, with a mysterious past connected to Thatcher Voss. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from these thoughts. Bridger entered, stopping short when he saw the journal on the floor. You've been reading Ralston's diary, he said, his voice carefully neutral. He suspected Thatcher poisoned him, Vanessa said, not bothering to deny it. Bridger nodded slowly. I suspected as much, though he never said it directly to me. Did you know about the will? That he changed it to force me to remarry? Not the details, just that he was concerned about your safety after he was gone. Bridger, or James, moved further into the room, his tall frame casting long shadows in the lamplight. Ralston knew Voss would come for the land, one way or another. And you? Vanessa asked, rising to face him. What does Voss want with you that he'd searched for years, across hundreds of miles? Bridger's expression darkened. It's complicated. I'm your wife, Vanessa said sharply, even if only by arrangement. I deserve to know what danger I'm in, what danger we're both in. He was silent for a long moment, then sighed heavily. You're right. He gestured to the table. You might want to sit down. It's a long story, and not a pleasant one. As they settled at the kitchen table with only the kerosene lamp between them, Bridger, or James, began his tale. I was a lieutenant in the 107th Ohio, as Lockhart said. After Gettysburg, I was reassigned to Sherman's Special Scouts, men who work behind Confederate lines gathering intelligence. Dangerous work, but I was good at it. Too good, maybe. He paused, his eyes focused on some distant memory. In the summer of '64, during the Atlanta campaign, I captured a Confederate officer carrying documents, battle plans, supply routes, coded messages. That officer was Thatcher Voss. Lockhart mentioned that, Vanessa prompted, when he fell silent. What Lockhart doesn't know is what happened after. Bridger's voice hardened. Voss tried to escape. There was a struggle. His pistol discharged. You killed him? Vanessa asked, confused. No, the bullet hit a young woman, a local farmer's daughter who'd been helping me navigate. She died instantly. His hands clenched on the table. Voss claimed I'd deliberately used her as a shield, that I'd been, he hesitated, intimate with her in exchange for her help, then murdered her to keep her quiet. That's absurd, Vanessa said. No one would believe such a story. In wartime, people believe what supports their side. The Confederates used it as propaganda, the brutal Yankee officer who seduced and murdered an innocent Southern girl. The Union command wasn't sure what to believe, but they needed my skills, so they hushed it up and kept me in the field. But the war ended, Vanessa said. Surely the truth came out. Bridger shook his head. After Appomattox, Voss's accusations resurfaced. There was to be an inquiry, but before it happened, the girl's brothers came looking for revenge. They didn't want military justice. They wanted blood. Mine. So you ran. I disappeared, he corrected. Changed my name from James Montgomery to Bridger McCallan. Headed west where no one knew me. Worked my way north, staying nowhere long enough to be remembered, until road agents attacked me outside Bannack. That's when Ralston found me. And recognized you, Vanessa added, the pieces falling into place. From the war? Bridger nodded. We'd served together briefly before I joined the Scouts. He knew the real story of what happened with Voss and the girl. Knew I was innocent. Why didn't you tell me all this before? Because knowing puts you in danger, he said simply. Voss isn't just after your land, Vanessa. He wants revenge on me. And he's willing to go to extraordinary lengths to get it, even murder. The implication hung in the air between them. If Thatcher Voss had poisoned Ralston, what would he do to Vanessa if he discovered she'd married the man he'd hunted for over a decade? The condition in Ralston's will, Vanessa said slowly. The male heir. He knew that would force us together. He knew I'd protect you, Bridger said quietly. Because of my debt to him, yes, but also because it was the right thing to do. And now, Vanessa asked, what do we do now that Voss knows you're here? Bridger's expression was grim. We fulfill the condition in Ralston's will, we secure your claim to the land, and we prepare for Voss to make his move. You think he'll come for us directly? I think he'll try to destroy us any way he can, Bridger replied, and we need to be ready when he does. As night settled fully over the Montana plains, Vanessa Cole McCallan faced the stunning realization that her marriage of convenience had become something far more dangerous. An alliance against a powerful enemy who would stop at nothing to possess her land and destroy her husband. And somewhere in the darkness beyond their ranch, Thatcher Voss was already making plans to ensure that neither of them would live to see the condition in Ralston's will fulfilled. Vanessa awoke to the smell of smoke. For one disoriented moment, she thought Bridger must be cooking breakfast. Then she registered the quality of the smell, not wood smoke from the stove, but the acrid scent of burning timber. She bolted upright, suddenly alert. Through the bedroom window, an orange glow illuminated the pre-dawn darkness. The barn was on fire. Bridger, she called, throwing aside the quilt and rushing to the parlor where he still insisted on sleeping. The sofa was empty, the blanket thrown back. Outside, she could hear shouting. the panicked whinnying of horses. Grabbing Ralston's shotgun from beside the door, Vanessa ran out into the yard. The scene was chaos. The barn blazed against the night sky, flames licking up the wooden walls, consuming the hay stored in the loft. Bridger and Pedro, their Mexican ranch hand, were frantically leading horses from the burning structure while trying to control the other livestock that had broken free in the panic. "Vanessa!" Bridger shouted when he spotted her. "Stay back!" Ignoring him, she ran to help, taking the reins of two frightened horses from Pedro and leading them to the corral. The heat from the fire was intense, singeing her eyebrows and making her skin feel tight and hot. "Is everyone out?" she called to Bridger as he emerged from the barn with the last horse, a young colt that bucked and pulled against the lead rope. "Animals are clear," he confirmed, his face streaked with soot. Too late for the building. Without the resources of a town fire brigade, there was little they could do but watch as the barn collapsed in on itself, sending a shower of embers spiraling into the night sky. By dawn, all that remained was a smoking ruin and the acrid smell of destruction. "It wasn't an accident," Bridger said grimly as they surveyed the damage in the gray morning light. "I found this." He held up an empty kerosene bottle. "Someone doused the north wall and lit it." "Voss?" Vanessa asked, though she already knew the answer. "Has to be." Bridger's expression was hard. "This is just the beginning, Vanessa. He'll keep coming at us, keep trying to drive us off or worse." Sheriff Hale arrived mid-morning, summoned by Pedro, who'd ridden into town at first light. He examined the ruins in the kerosene bottle, his expression grave. "I'll look into it," he promised, though his tone suggested limited optimism. "But without witnesses—" "We know who did this," Vanessa said tightly. "Who ordered it, at least." Hale sighed. "Knowing and proving are different things, Mrs. McCallan, especially when the man in question has the territorial judge in his pocket." After the sheriff departed, Vanessa and Bridger took stock of their losses. The barn could be rebuilt eventually, but the stored hay for winter feed was gone, along with most of their tools intact. "We'll manage," Bridger assured her as they sat on the porch that evening, exhausted from the day's efforts to salvage what they could. "Lockhart offered to loan us his old hay shed until we can rebuild, and the horses can shelter in the lean-to for now." Vanessa nodded, too tired for words. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They were at war with Thatcher Voss, a man with resources, connections, and a personal vendetta. What chance did they have against someone who could burn their barn with impunity, who might have already murdered Ralston, who had been hunting Bridger for years? "We should sell," she said suddenly. "Take Voss's offer and leave. Start somewhere new, somewhere safe." "Is that what you want?" Bridger asked, studying her face in the fading light. "What I want is to live without fear," she replied. "Without wondering if tonight's the night he burns the house instead of the barn. Without watching you look over your shoulder every time we go to town." "Running won't solve this," Bridger said quietly. "Voss will find us. Men like him don't let go of grudges." "Then what do we do?" Bridger was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "We fight," he said finally, "but on our terms, not his." "How?" "First, we secure your claim to the land by meeting the condition in Ralston's will." The implication hung in the air between them. They had been married for nearly a month, yet had not consummated the union, had not taken the necessary step toward fulfilling the will's requirement of a male heir. Vanessa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Bridger, Only when you're ready," he said gently. "This isn't a transaction to me, Vanessa, despite how it started." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that their marriage of convenience had evolved into something neither had anticipated. Something deeper, more complex, fraught with both danger and possibility. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Through the gathering dusk, they could make out 3 men on horseback coming fast down the road from Helena. Bridger was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Get inside," he ordered. "No," Vanessa said firmly, raising Ralston's shotgun. "This is my ranch too. I'll defend it beside you." As the riders drew closer, Bridger tensed, then unexpectedly relaxed. "It's Lockhart," he said, lowering his rifle slightly, "and 2 of his men." John Lockhart reined in his horse sharply, dismounting with the stiffness of a man who'd ridden hard despite aging bones. His weathered face was grim. Montgomery, he said, nodding to Bridger. Mrs. McCallan, got news you need to hear. What's happened? Bridger asked, still alert despite recognizing his former employer. Voss is making his move, Lockhart said without preamble. He's filed papers claiming Clear Creek was mistakenly included in the original coal land grant. Says the true boundary runs half a mile east of where it's always been. That's absurd, Vanessa protested. The creek has been part of this property since my father-in-law homesteaded here. Doesn't matter what's true, Lockhart replied. Only what Judge Morrison rules. And word is he's already decided in Voss's favor. Bridger's face hardened. When? Ruling comes down tomorrow morning. Without water rights, this ranch loses half its value. That's why he burned the barn, Vanessa realized. A distraction while he manipulated the boundary dispute. Lockhart nodded. Likely, but there's more. Voss has been asking specific questions about Montgomery, about Atlanta, about the girl. Bridger went very still. He knows. Seems so, and he's not just filing land disputes. He sent telegrams east, to the War Department, to Ohio, to anyone who might have known Lieutenant James Montgomery. He's trying to expose me, Bridger said, force me to either run or face the old accusations. What accusations? Vanessa asked, looking between the two men. Lockhart's expression was solemn. Murder, Mrs. McCallan. Your husband is still wanted for questioning about the death of a civilian during the war. Voss is trying to bring those charges forward again. The ground seemed to shift beneath Vanessa's feet. Murder. The word echoed in her mind, impossible to reconcile with the man standing beside her. The man she'd married, the man she was beginning to care for more deeply than she'd ever intended. I didn't kill her, Bridger said quietly, his eyes on Vanessa. I swear to you, it was Voss's bullet, his lie. I believe you, she said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. But what do we do now if Voss takes the creek tomorrow and exposes your past? We lose everything. Lockhart cleared his throat. That's why I'm here. The Ranchers Association has voted. We're standing with you against Voss. What does that mean, exactly? Bridger asked. It means 20 armed men will be riding with you to that courthouse tomorrow, Lockhart said grimly. It means we're done letting Thatcher Voss dictate who owns what in this territory. You're talking about open defiance of a court ruling, Bridger said. I'm talking about justice, Lockhart countered. Ralston Cole was a friend to every rancher in this valley. He helped us all at one time or another. We won't stand by while Voss steals his land and persecutes his widow. Vanessa felt a surge of gratitude and hope. They weren't alone in this fight. The community Ralston had been part of for so many years was rallying to their defense. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lockhart nodded gruffly. Be ready to ride at dawn. This won't be easy, and Voss will have his own men there. After Lockhart and his men departed, Vanessa and Bridger stood in silence on the porch, the gravity of what tomorrow might bring settling over them. You don't have to do this, Bridger said finally. This was my battle with Voss long before it was yours. It became my battle when he poisoned my husband, Vanessa replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. When he tried to steal my land, when he burned my barn. She turned to face him fully, seeing not just the ranch hand she'd married out of desperation, but the man behind the name he'd borrowed, a man with courage, integrity, and demons he'd been running from for far too long. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, we face it together. In the soft glow of the porch lantern, with the ruins of their barn still smoldering in the distance, Vanessa Cole McCallan made a decision that would change everything. She reached up, placing her hand against her husband's cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. James, she said softly, using his real name for the first time, tonight I don't want to be alone. His eyes, usually so guarded, revealed a flash of vulnerability. Are you sure? Instead of answering, she took his hand and led him inside, closing the door on the dangers that awaited them tomorrow. For tonight, at least, they would find comfort in each other, a union begun in convenience but now transformed by shared purpose and growing affection. As they crossed the threshold of the bedroom that had once been hers and Ralston's, Vanessa felt not guilt, but a strange sense of rightness, as if her first husband had somehow orchestrated this very outcome, bringing together the woman he loved and the man who owed him a life debt, creating a new alliance that might just be strong enough to defeat their common enemy. Outside, a coyote howled at the rising moon, its lonely call echoing across the vast Montana plains, a reminder of the wild, unforgiving land they were fighting for, and the even wilder justice that tomorrow might bring. Dawn broke blood red over the eastern Montana plains, casting long shadows across the Cole McAllen ranch. Vanessa stood on the porch watching as riders appeared on the horizon. Lockhart and his promised men, 20 strong, armed and determined. She'd slept little. The night with Bridger, with James, had changed things between them in ways she was still processing. What had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved into something genuine, something that made her heart quicken when their eyes met across the breakfast table that morning. But there was no time to examine these new feelings. Today they would face Thatcher Voss and Helena, challenging his attempt to steal their water rights and expose James's past. Today would determine whether they kept the ranch or lost everything. "They're here," James said, emerging from the house with rifle in hand. He'd shaved and combed his hair, wearing the one good suit he possessed. Ralston's altered to fit his taller frame. He looked different somehow, more commanding, less the quiet ranch hand and more the Union officer he had once been. "You look like a different man," she observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "In some ways I am." He met her gaze directly. "No more hiding, Vanessa. Whatever happens today, I'm done running from Voss and his lies." The conviction in his voice stirred something in her. Pride, fear, and a fierce protectiveness. Last night had been a revelation, showing her not just his strength, but his vulnerability, the scars both physical and emotional that he carried from the war. She traced the puckered bullet wound on his shoulder, listening as he finally shared the full story of Atlanta, of the young woman's death, of Voss's manipulation of the truth. "We'll face him together," she said, taking his hand briefly before the approaching riders demanded their attention. Lockhart led the group, his weathered face grim beneath his hat brim. Behind him rode a cross-section of the county's ranchers and farmers, men who rarely agreed on anything, but who had united against a common threat. "Morning, Bohm," he called, reining in his horse. "Ready to ride?" James nodded, turning to Vanessa. "Stay here, it'll be safer." "Not a chance," she replied, already moving toward the barn where her horse was saddled. "This is my fight, too." Lockhart's eyebrow rose slightly, but he said nothing, merely nodding with grudging respect when Vanessa mounted and took her place beside James. "Voss will have his own men there," Lockhart warned as they set off toward Helena, "including Judge Morrison. This won't be settled with handshakes." "We're not looking for trouble," James replied, though the rifle resting across his saddle suggested otherwise. "Just justice." The 10-mile ride to Helena gave Vanessa time to think. About Ralston, about his suspicions that Voss had poisoned him, about the condition in his will that had seemed so cruel but was actually his way of ensuring she'd be protected, about James Montgomery, the man he'd saved and brought to their ranch, knowing that someday they might need each other. Had Ralston somehow foreseen all this? Had he known that Voss would eventually discover James's identity, that the old war grudge would reignite? Had he deliberately thrown them together, knowing they'd be stronger united than apart? As they crested the final ridge overlooking Helena, Vanessa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Smoke rose from several points in town, and even from a distance they could see unusual activity in the streets. Groups of men moving with purpose, horses tethered outside the courthouse in greater numbers than normal. "Something's wrong," Lockhart muttered, spurring his horse forward. They encountered the first signs of trouble at the town's edge. A freight wagon lay overturned, its contents scattered across the road. The driver sat on the boardwalk, a bloody rag pressed to his head. "What happened?" Lockhart demanded, dismounting. "Voss's men," the freighter spat, "said the road was closed to undesirables. When I argued they did this." He gestured to his bloodied head. James exchanged a look with Vanessa. "He's blocking access to town." "The courthouse," she corrected. "He doesn't want us contesting the boundary ruling." Lockhart remounted, his expression hardening. "We'll take the South Road in. Avoid the main street." As they rode through back alleys toward the courthouse, more signs of Voss's influence became evident. Armed men stood on corners, watching their progress with open hostility. Several businesses that normally would be open remained shuttered, their owners apparently warned to stay closed. "This isn't legal," one of Lockhart's men growled. "He can't take over a whole town." He can, if the sheriff and judge are in his pocket, James replied grimly, and if enough people are afraid to stand against him. When they finally reached the courthouse square, they found it transformed into a fortress. At least 30 armed men surrounded the building, with Voss himself standing on the steps, impeccably dressed as always, watching their approach with cold amusement. "Quite the assembly, Mr. McCallan," he called as they halted before the square. "Or should I say, Lieutenant Montgomery?" A ripple went through the crowd at the name. James straightened in his saddle, his face expressionless. "We're here for the boundary hearing, Voss," he replied evenly. "Nothing more?" "Are you?" Voss descended the steps slowly. "I rather thought you were here to threaten a duly appointed territorial judge with violence if he doesn't rule in your favor." He gestured to the armed ranchers. "That is the purpose of your delegation, isn't it?" "We're here to ensure justice is done," Lockhart countered. "Not to watch you steal land that's belonged to the Cole family for 20 years. Voss smiled thinly. "Justice is precisely what we're administering today." His gaze shifted to James. "For old crimes as well as new." "What's he talking about?" one of Lockhart's men muttered. "Lieutenant James Montgomery," Voss announced loudly, addressing the growing crowd of townspeople who had gathered to watch the confrontation. "Wanted for the murder of Elizabeth Beaumont, a civilian, during the late war between the states. A man who has hidden among you for years under a false name, evading justice for his crimes." "That's a lie," James said, his voice carrying. "Elizabeth Beaumont died from a bullet fired from your gun, Voss, during your escape attempt after being captured behind Union lines." "A convenient tale," Voss sneered, "but not the one recorded in official reports. Not the one her brothers have been pursuing for 12 years. He gestured, and two men stepped forward from the courthouse doors. They were clearly related, with the same heavy brows and hard eyes. "The Beaumont brothers have traveled a long way for justice, Lieutenant. They've waited a long time to see their sister's killer face consequences." Vanessa felt sick. This was Voss's plan all along, not just to take their land, but to orchestrate a vengeance born in wartime grievances, manipulating these brothers with a twisted version of the truth. "Don't do this, Voss," she called, urging her horse forward. "This isn't about the war, Elizabeth Beaumont. It's about Ralston's land you've wanted for years." "Mrs. McCallan," Voss acknowledged with mock courtesy. "Or should I still call you Mrs. Cole? It's so difficult to keep track when a widow remarries with such haste." "Call me what you want," Vanessa replied steadily. "But know this, we have evidence that you poisoned my husband." A murmur ran through the crowd. Voss's smile faltered briefly before returning, tighter than before. "Accusations without proof are slander, Mrs. McCallan. I'd be careful if I were you." "We have Ralston's journal," James said, picking up Vanessa's thread, "detailing your visit before his illness, the unusual progression of his symptoms, his suspicions." "The ravings of a dying man," Voss dismissed. "Hardly evidence." "Enough talk," the elder Beaumont brother growled, stepping forward. "We didn't come for a debate. We came for him." He pointed at James, his hand moving dangerously close to his holstered pistol. The tension in the square ratcheted higher. Lockhart's men shifted, hands dropping to weapons. Voss's guards did the same. "There won't be a lynching today," Lockhart stated flatly. "Montgomery's entitled to a fair hearing, same as anyone." "There won't be any hearing," came a new voice. Judge Morrison emerged from the courthouse, flanked by more armed men. "The territorial governor has declared martial law in Helena following reports of armed gangs threatening the peace." He nodded toward Lockhart's riders. "As such, all assemblies are forbidden, and the court is closed until order is restored." "Convenient timing," James observed coldly. Morrison ignored him. "Furthermore, I have received documentation from federal authorities regarding the fugitive James Montgomery. He is to be arrested immediately and held for transfer to military authorities." "This is a setup," Vanessa said, anger replacing fear. "Voss arranged all of this. The martial law declaration, the arrest order. It's all to prevent us from contesting the boundary ruling." "Which incidentally has already been decided," Voss added smoothly. "The court finds that Clear Creek was erroneously included in the original Cole land grant. The correct boundary runs half a mile east of the waterway." "You can't do this," Vanessa protested. "You can't just steal our water rights without a hearing." It's already done, Morrison replied, producing a document bearing the territorial seal. The ruling was finalized yesterday. I'm merely announcing it now for your benefit. James's hand moved to his rifle, but Vanessa caught his arm. No, she whispered. Not like this. They'll kill you. The square had become a powder keg, with 30 armed men on each side, separated only by the width of the dusty street. Civilians scrambled to clear the area, sensing the imminent violence. Montgomery, Lockhart said quietly, we're outnumbered here, and they've got the law on their side, crooked as it is. This isn't over, Voss, James called, his voice steady despite the fury evident in his face. You've manipulated the law, but you haven't won. Haven't I? Voss smiled coldly. I've reclaimed the water rights to Clear Creek. I've exposed you as a murderer and a fugitive. And by sundown, I'll have a federal warrant to search the coal ranch for evidence of harboring a known criminal. His gaze shifted to Vanessa. That would make you an accessory, Mrs. McCallan. A serious charge indeed. The implication was clear. Voss had outmaneuvered them completely. Even if James evaded arrest today, returning to the ranch would only endanger Vanessa. We ride out, Lockhart decided, signaling his men. This fight's for another day. As they turned their horses, Voss called after them. Montgomery, the Beaumont brothers will be staying in Helena until they see justice done. Don't stray too far. The threat lingered in the air as they retreated through the back streets of Helena, the morning's hopes shattered by Voss's ruthless planning. He had anticipated their every move, manipulated the law, and brought James's past to bear against them with devastating effectiveness. They rode in grim silence until they reached the edge of town, where Lockhart halted the group. This changes things, he said bluntly. Voss has the law on his side now. Fighting him openly won't work. What do you suggest? James asked. Split up. Make it harder for them to follow. Half the men will ride with Mrs. McCallan back to the ranch. The rest will come with me and Montgomery to the Box L. He referred to his own ranch, the largest in the county. We'll regroup there, figure out our next move. Vanessa immediately protested. I'm not leaving James. You have to, James said quietly. Voss will be watching the ranch. If we're seen together, he'll have the excuse he needs to arrest both of us. I don't care, she insisted. We said we'd face this together. And we will, he promised, taking her hand, but not by riding straight into his trap. Go home. Secure what you can. I'll find a way to contact you when it's safe. The logic was undeniable, but the prospect of separation tore at her. After just one night of true connection, to be parted now seemed unbearably cruel. I'll keep him safe, Lockhart assured her. Voss won't find him at the Box L. With reluctance, Vanessa agreed to the plan. As they prepared to part ways, she and James moved slightly apart from the others for a moment of privacy. This isn't how I imagined today would end, she said softly. Nor I. His hand touched her face briefly. Keep Ralston's journal safe. It's our only evidence against Voss. I will. She hesitated, then added, James, last night wasn't goodbye, he finished for her. I promise you that. With that inadequate farewell, they parted. Vanessa riding east with half of Lockhart's men, James heading north toward the Boxall Ranch. Neither knew if or when they would see each other again, or what further moves Voss might make against them. The coal ranch seemed eerily quiet when Vanessa returned that afternoon. Pedro met them in the yard, his expression troubled. Riders came, he reported in his accented English. Looking for Senor Bridger. Had papers. He handed Vanessa a crumpled document that had been left tacked to the door. It was an arrest warrant for James Montgomery, alias Bridger McCallan, for the murder of Elizabeth Beaumont in Georgia, 1864, and for evading military justice. At the bottom was a notice that any person harboring or assisting the fugitive would face federal charges. Did they search the house? Vanessa asked. Pedro nodded. Everything. They take some papers from the desk. Ralston's journal. Vanessa's heart sank. Their only evidence that Voss had poisoned Ralston gone. She'd planned to hide it upon returning, but Voss's men had moved faster than expected. What now, Mrs. McCallan? Asked one of Lockhart's men. Now we secure what we can, she replied with more confidence than she felt. Voss has the water rights to Clear Creek, but not the ranch itself, not yet. The men helped move the remaining livestock to the western pasture, away from the disputed creek boundary. They repaired what they could of the burned barn, erected a temporary shelter for the horses, and posted guards around the perimeter. As night fell, Vanessa found herself alone in the house for the first time since her marriage to James. The emptiness was palpable. She moved through the rooms restlessly, unable to settle, feeling exposed and vulnerable without him there. A knock at the door startled her. Hand on Ralston's shotgun, she approached cautiously. "Who's there?" "Dr. Craven, Mrs. McCallan." She opened the door to find the elderly physician standing on her porch, medical bag in hand. "Doctor, is someone hurt?" "May I come in?" he asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I shouldn't be seen here." Once inside, Craven's professional demeanor gave way to agitation. "I heard what happened in town. Voss is telling everyone that your husband, Mr. McCallan that is a fugitive murderer." "It's not true," Vanessa said firmly. "James is innocent. Voss twisted the facts to serve his vendetta." "I believe you," Craven replied, surprising her. "I've known Thatcher Voss for 20 years, seen how he operates." He hesitated, then added, "That's why I've come. There's something you should know about your first husband's death." Vanessa tensed. "Ralston was poisoned. We suspected as much." "I suspected it too," Craven admitted. "The symptoms weren't consistent with consumption, too acute, too rapid. But I had no proof, and accusing Thatcher Voss of murder without evidence would have been unwise." "Voss took Ralston's journal," Vanessa said bitterly. "It detailed his suspicions, noted Voss's visit before the illness began." Craven nodded thoughtfully. "That would explain why they searched the house so thoroughly." He reached into his coat pocket. "But it doesn't explain this." He produced a small glass vial containing a fine white powder. "I found this in Ralston's body during the preparation for burial. Didn't know what it was then, but I kept it. Had it analyzed by a chemist in Bozeman last month after hearing rumors about the changed will and Voss's interest in your property." "What is it?" Vanessa asked, though she feared she already knew. "Arsenic," Craven confirmed. "A lethal dose, accumulated in the liver tissue. Ralston Cole was murdered, Mrs. McCallan, and I'm prepared to testify to that fact." The confirmation of what they'd suspected was still shocking. Vanessa sat heavily, absorbing the doctor's words. "Why now? Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Fear," he admitted shamefully. "Voss has influence throughout the territory. But after today's events, the martial law declaration, the boundary ruling without a hearing, it's clear his power has grown too absolute. Someone must stand against him." Vanessa studied the elderly doctor, seeing the courage it had taken for him to come here to offer this evidence. "This could be dangerous for you, de Craven." "I'm an old man," he replied simply, "but I still believe in justice. Ralston Cole deserves that much." After Craven departed, promising to secure the arsenic evidence in his office safe, Vanessa felt simultaneously heartened and overwhelmed. They now had concrete proof of Voss's deadliest crime, but James was in hiding, separated from her, and the ranch's water rights had already been stolen through legal manipulation. How could they use this evidence when the territorial judge was in Voss's pocket? How could they reach James to tell him about this development when his location had to remain secret? Sleep eluded her that night. She lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, wondering where James was, if he was safe, if they would ever have the chance to explore what had begun between them that one precious night. Dawn brought no answers, only a new crisis. "Mrs. McCallan!" Pedro's urgent voice called from outside. "Riders coming! Many riders!" Vanessa rushed to the porch, glass in hand. Through the early morning haze, she could make out at least a dozen horsemen approaching from the east, from the direction of Helena. "Get the men," she ordered Pedro, who raced to alert Lockhart's ranchers still camped near the corral. By the time the riders reached the ranch yard, Vanessa stood on the porch with 6 armed men flanking her. She recognized the leader immediately, Matthew Beaumont, the elder of the brothers Voss had brought to Helena. "Mrs. McCallan," he called, reining in his horse. "We're looking for James Montgomery." "He's not here," she replied evenly, "as I'm sure you've been told." Beaumont dismounted, approaching the porch steps. He was a hard-looking man in his 40s, with deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth, the face of someone who had nursed a grudge for far too long. "We have a warrant to search these premises," he announced, producing a document. "Signed by Judge Morrison." "You searched yesterday," Vanessa pointed out. "Found nothing then, you'll find nothing now." "Yesterday was federal marshals," Beaumont corrected. Today it's us. We have reason to believe Montgomery returned here during the night. It was a lie, but a deliberate one, designed to give them an excuse to search again, or worse. My men won't allow another search, Vanessa stated firmly, nodding to the armed ranchers beside her. Beaumont's expression hardened. We're not asking permission, ma'am. We're exercising legal authority. You're exercising Thatcher Voss's vendetta, she countered. This has nothing to do with your sister. It's about Voss wanting this land, wanting revenge against James for capturing him during the war. You're being used. Doubt flickered briefly across Beaumont's face before his features settled back into determined lines. Step aside, Mrs. McCallan. We don't want trouble with you, just the man who killed our sister. James didn't kill Elizabeth, Vanessa insisted. It was Voss's bullet. He's lied to you, manipulated your grief for his own purposes. Enough talk, one of the other brothers growled, dismounting. She's stalling. The tension escalated as the remaining riders dismounted, spreading out to flank the house. Lockhart's men raised their rifles in warning. First man sets foot on that porch dies, declared one of the ranchers, an older man named Jenkins, who had served with Lockhart in the Mexican War. Beaumont raised his hand slightly. We don't want bloodshed, but we will search this property one way or another. Vanessa realized they were at an impasse that could only end in violence. Even if they drove off the Beaumont brothers today, they would return with more men, perhaps with federal marshals. The ranch couldn't withstand a siege. I'll make you a deal, she said suddenly. You leave now, peacefully, and I'll arrange for James Montgomery to meet with you, to tell his side of the story. If you still believe him guilty after hearing him out, so be it. Beaumont looked skeptical. Why would he agree to that? Man's been running for 12 years. Because he's innocent, Vanessa said simply, and because he's tired of running from a lie. The brothers conferred briefly, then Beaumont turned back to her. Where and when? Neutral ground, the churchyard in Helena, noon tomorrow. We'll be there, Beaumont agreed. But if this is a trick, it's not, Vanessa assured him, though she had no idea if James would agree to this meeting or if she could even get word to him in time. Back way, through the high country, Beaumonts won't think to watch that road. Hope surged within Vanessa. When can we leave? Nightfall, Almeida decided. Less chance of being spotted. As they prepared for the journey, Vanessa filled Almeida in on the events in Helena and Dr. Craravan's revelation about the arsenic evidence. So Voss did poison Ralston, Almeida said grimly. Bastard's even colder than I thought. We have proof now, Vanessa replied, but using it won't be simple, not with Morrison corrupted and martial law declared in Helena. Might need to go over Morrison's head, Almeida suggested. Take it to the territorial governor in Virginia City. That's a 4-day ride, Vanessa pointed out, and we don't know if the governor isn't also in Voss's pocket. Almeida considered this. What about the military? There's that new commander at Fort Ellis, Colonel Harrison, career officer, by all accounts honest. Military justice might listen where civilian courts won't. The idea had merit. James's situation involved military charges, after all. If they could present evidence that Voss had lied about Elizabeth Beaumont's death, that he had subsequently murdered Ralston Cole to acquire his land, perhaps the army would intervene. We'll discuss it with James, Vanessa decided. Tonight. As dusk approached, Vanessa packed a few essential items, including Ralston's old service revolver and what little money they had saved. She had no illusion that they would be returning soon. Once they fled, Voss would seize the opportunity to claim they had abandoned the ranch. Pedro agreed to remain behind with 2 of Lockhart's men, maintaining the appearance that Vanessa was still in residence. It was a risk for the loyal Mexican, but he insisted. This is my home too, senora, he said simply. I will protect it until you return. Night had fully fallen when Almeida gave the signal to depart. They slipped out the barn door, moving quietly to where 3 horses waited in a stand of cottonwoods beyond the barn ruins. We'll ride north along the ridge, Almeida whispered as they mounted, then cut west through Thompson's Pass. It's rough country, but the Beaumonts won't think to watch it. They had just reached the trees at the property's edge when a shot rang out, echoing across the ranch yard. Then another, and another. Shouts followed, then the distinctive crack of return fire. Ambush, Almeida hissed. They must have left men hidden nearby. Vanessa turned her horse, prepared to ride back, but Almeida grabbed her reins. No, that's what they want, to catch you returning. I can't leave Pedro and the others to fight alone, Vanessa protested. They knew the risk, Almeida said firmly. Our job is to reach James. That's how we help them most. The logic was sound, but the guilt of riding away while gunfire continued behind them tore at Vanessa's conscience. She offered a silent prayer for Pedro and Lockhart's men as they urged their horses into the darkness, the sounds of battle fading behind them. They rode hard through the night, taking the treacherous high trail that skirted the eastern edge of Lockhart's vast property. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles of rough country, their horses exhausted, their own bodies aching from the punishing pace. We'll rest here, Almeida decided as they reached a secluded hollow with a small spring, just long enough for the horses to recover. As they dismounted, Vanessa caught movement on the ridge above them. Her hand went to Ralston's revolver, but Almeida stopped her. Wait, she cautioned, studying the figure. That's one of Lockhart's men. Indeed, the rider approached cautiously, then with more confidence as he recognized Almeida. It was Jenkins, one of the men who had stayed behind at the ranch. Mrs. McCallan, he called, relief evident in his voice. Thank God you're safe. Jenkins, what happened at the ranch? Is Pedro? He's alive, Jenkins assured her, dismounting stiffly. Blood stained his left sleeve. But they burned us out. Beaumont's and some others, Voss's men, I think, waited until they thought you'd gone to bed, then attacked from all sides. The house? Vanessa asked, dreading the answer. Standing, but they ransacked it completely. Looking for Montgomery, they said, but I think they were really after something else. Evidence, Vanessa realized. They wanted to ensure nothing remained that could implicate Voss in Ralston's murder. Jenkins nodded grimly. Pedro and I escaped during the confusion. The other men, I don't know. He winced as he shifted his injured arm. Almeida examined the wound, a bullet graze, painful but not severe, and bound it with strips torn from her spare shirt. How did you find us? Vanessa asked as Almeida worked. Didn't, Jenkins admitted. Was heading to the box L to warn Montgomery. Figured you'd aim there, too. Is James still there? Vanessa asked urgently. Is he safe? A shadow crossed Jenkins' face. That's the other news. Lockhart's ranch was hit last night, too. Someone betrayed Montgomery's location. Vanessa's blood ran cold. Was he captured? Is he? Don't know, Jenkins replied honestly. Place was in chaos when I rode past at dawn. Saw federal marshals, Beaumont brothers, some of Voss's men. Gunshots earlier. Almeida finished bandaging his arm. Then we need to move now. If they've taken James, they'll head straight back to Helena. To what end? Vanessa asked, though she feared she knew the answer. Justice, Jenkins said grimly. Their version of it, anyway, mob justice. The implication was clear. If James had been captured, he might well face a lynching rather than a trial. The Beaumont brothers, manipulated by Voss, would ensure he never had the chance to expose the truth about their sister's death or Voss's subsequent crimes. We ride for Helena, Vanessa decided. Now. As they mounted their barely rested horses, Vanessa's mind raced with desperate plans. They had evidence of Voss's crimes, Craven's arsenic sample, but would it be enough? Could they reach the authorities in time if James had indeed been captured? And who could they trust in a town where Voss's influence seemed to extend to every official? The sun climbed higher as they pushed their exhausted mounts toward Helena, each mile bringing them closer to a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of the coal ranch, but the lives of everyone involved in this deadly game of land, revenge, and buried truths. Behind them, smoke rose from the ruins of what had been her home. Ahead, the uncertain fate of the man she'd married for convenience but had come to care for deeply. And somewhere in between, Thatcher Voss, orchestrating it all, confident that his power and influence would shield him from justice for crimes spanning more than a decade. But Vanessa Cole McCallan had one advantage Voss couldn't anticipate. She no longer had anything to lose. Her home was destroyed, her land stolen, her husband in peril. All that remained was the truth, and the determination to ensure it finally came to light, no matter the cost. As Helena appeared on the horizon, Vanessa made a silent vow. Before this day ended, either Thatcher Voss would face justice for his crimes, or she would join Ralston in death, trying to secure it. Helena's main street was unnaturally quiet as Vanessa, Almeida, and Jenkins approached. The usual bustle of a territorial town at midday was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that raised the hair on Vanessa's neck. Shuttered storefronts and empty boardwalks gave the impression of a place holding its breath, waiting for violence to erupt. "Something's wrong," Jenkins muttered, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Too quiet." Almeida nodded grimly, like the calm before a storm. They tied their horses at the livery stable on the town's edge, preferring to proceed on foot to avoid drawing attention. The livery owner, a taciturn man named Simmons, confirmed their fears. "They brought him in this morning," he said in a low voice, glancing nervously at the door. "Your husband, Beaumont brothers, and some federal marshals took him straight to the courthouse jail." "Is he alive?" Vanessa asked, her heart in her throat. "Was when they passed by," Simmons affirmed. "Looked beat up some, but walking under his own power." "What's happening now?" Jenkins pressed. Simmons shook his head. "Judge Morrison called a special session. Trial set for 2 o'clock. He glanced at the wall clock. "That's less than an hour from now." "Trial?" Vanessa repeated incredulously. "Without time to prepare a defense? Without witnesses?" "Not a proper trial, Mrs. McCallan," Simmons said quietly. "Just a formality before they hang him." The blunt assessment struck Vanessa like a physical blow. Voss had orchestrated everything perfectly. The capture, the rushed proceeding, all under the guise of legal process but designed with only one outcome in mind. "We need to get to Dr. Craven," she said, gathering her composure. "He has the evidence about Ralston's poisoning." "Won't matter if Morrison's presiding," Jenkins pointed out. "He's in Voss's pocket." "Then we need someone higher than Morrison," Almeida suggested. "What about that Army colonel you mentioned from Fort Ellis?" "Colonel Harrison," Vanessa remembered, "but Fort Ellis is 30 miles away. We'd never make it in time." "Don't need to," Simmons interjected, surprising them. "Colonel's in town. Saw him ride in this morning with a detachment of cavalry. Something about security concerns with the martial law declaration." Hope flickered in Vanessa's chest. A federal military officer would be outside Voss's sphere of influence, especially one newly assigned to the territory. "Where are they quartered?" she asked urgently. "Helena Hotel," Simmons replied. "But you won't get near him. Voss has men watching the place." Of course he did. Voss would have anticipated that the military might interfere with his plans. He would have taken steps to ensure Kriegerfarmen. Colonel Harrison remained uninformed about the true situation until it was too late. "We'll need a distraction," Almeida decided, her mind working quickly. "Something to draw Voss's men away from the hotel." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "Fire would do it, not a real one, just enough smoke to cause a commotion." "And I'll need different clothes," Vanessa added, glancing down at her dust-covered riding outfit. "Something less recognizable." Simmons's wife provided a simple dress and shawl that transformed Vanessa's appearance, making her look like any of the dozens of shopkeepers' wives who populated Helena. Jenkins departed to create their diversion, while Almeida positioned herself near the courthouse to monitor any developments. Vanessa moved through the back alleys toward the Helena Hotel, a 3-story structure that represented the town's aspirations towards civilization. As she rounded the final corner, she saw Voss's men, 2 hard-faced individuals in suits too fine for ordinary ranch hands, standing outside the hotel entrance. She waited, counting the minutes, praying that Jenkins would succeed. The town's fire bell began to toll urgently, and shouts echoed from the direction of the warehouse district. Smoke rose in a dark column, drawing all eyes. The guards hesitated, then one ran toward the commotion, while the other remained at his post. Not perfect, but it would have to do. Vanessa pulled the shawl closer around her face and walked purposefully toward the hotel entrance. The remaining guard glanced at her, but her nondescript appearance and confident stride apparently raised no suspicions. She passed him without incident and entered the lobby. The hotel clerk eyed her with disinterest. "Help you, ma'am?" "I have an urgent message for Colonel Harrison," she said, keeping her voice low. "From Dr. Craven. It concerns a military matter." The clerk's expression remained bored. "Second floor, suite 3, but he left orders not to be disturbed before the hearing." So Harrison was planning to attend James's trial. That was something at least. But would he intervene without understanding the full context? Vanessa ascended the stairs, her mind racing. She had one chance to convince a complete stranger that the territorial justice system was corrupt, that Thatcher Voss had murdered Ralston Cole, and that James Montgomery was innocent of the charges against him, all within the next 30 minutes. She found suite 3 and knocked firmly. The door was opened by a young lieutenant whose expression suggested he had little patience for interruptions. "The colonel isn't receiving visitors, ma'am. This concerns a miscarriage of justice that's about to occur in your jurisdiction," Vanessa replied, ejecting her voice with all the authority she could muster. "I have evidence of murder that directly relates to the Montgomery case." The lieutenant hesitated, then a deeper voice called from within. "Let her in, Chambers. I want to hear this." Colonel Ethan Harrison was not what Vanessa had expected. Rather than the graying veteran she'd imagined, he was a man in his early 40s with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who had risen through the ranks on merit, rather than connections. The left sleeve of his uniform was pinned empty at the shoulder, a war injury obviously. "Mrs. McCallan, I presume," he said, surprising her. "Or do you prefer Mrs. Cole?" "You know who I am? I make it my business to understand the situations I'm called to adjudicate," he replied. "Please sit down and tell me why you believe Lieutenant Montgomery is innocent of the charges against him." Vanessa had prepared arguments, rehearsed evidence, but Harrison's direct approach caught her off guard. She decided to match his frankness. "James didn't kill Elizabeth Beaumont," she began. "It was Thatcher Voss's bullet that struck her during his escape attempt. He manipulated the evidence afterward, used his influence to shift blame, and has spent 12 years hunting James for revenge over his capture during the war." Harrison's expression revealed nothing. "That's a significant claim, Mrs. McCallan. Do you have evidence to support it?" "For that specific incident, only James's testimony," she admitted. "But I have proof that Voss murdered my first husband, Ralston Cole, to gain control of our ranch land, specifically the water rights to Clear Creek." She explained about Dr. Craven's arsenic evidence, Ralston's journal entries detailing his suspicions, and the pattern of Voss's actions since Ralston's death, all pointing to a man who would eliminate any obstacle to acquiring the land he coveted. "This same man is now manipulating territorial justice to silence James before he can expose the truth," she concluded. "The trial scheduled for today is nothing but a formality before an execution." Harrison was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the desk. "I've had concerns about Judge Morrison's impartiality since arriving," he admitted finally. "The martial law declaration seemed convenient, particularly as there was no evidence of the armed insurrection he cited as justification. Voss needed martial law to prevent us from contesting the boundary ruling that stole our water rights," Vanessa explained, "and to create the right conditions for James's capture and rapid trial." "Where is this arsenic evidence now?" "With Dr. Craven at his office." Harrison nodded to his lieutenant. "Chambers, bring the doctor and his evidence here. Use discretion." As the young officer departed, Harrison turned back to Vanessa. "Mrs. McCallan, even if what you say is true, my authority is limited. I can potentially intervene in Lieutenant Montgomery's case on the grounds that it involves military justice, but the boundary dispute and the alleged murder of Ralston Cole fall under territorial jurisdiction." "I understand," Vanessa said, "but if James is executed today, the truth about all of Voss's crimes dies with him. That's why Voss has orchestrated this so carefully." Harrison's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Tell me more about Voss. I understand he served in the Confederate cavalry." "He was captured by James while carrying intelligence behind Union lines in 1864, Vanessa confirmed. "Near Atlanta." A flash of recognition crossed Harrison's face. "The Chattahoochee River incident. I remember the reports. A Confederate officer captured with battle plans, a civilian casualty, accusations of misconduct." He leaned forward. "I was serving on Sherman's staff at the time. There was an investigation, but it was interrupted by the March to the Sea." Hope surged within Vanessa. "Then you know the case?" "I know there were inconsistencies in the Confederate officer's account," Harrison said carefully. "Enough that several of us questioned the charges against Lieutenant Montgomery, but he disappeared before the matter could be resolved. Because the Beaumont brothers were hunting him," Vanessa explained. "They wanted vengeance, not justice, and now they have territorial authority behind them," Harrison mused. "A dangerous combination." The door opened, admitting Lieutenant Chambers with Dr. Craven, who clutched his medical bag nervously. "Colonel Harrison," the doctor acknowledged. "Mrs. McCallan has explained the situation?" "She has. I understand you have evidence suggesting Ralston Cole was poisoned." Craven produced the vial of white powder and accompanying documentation from the Bozeman chemist. Arsenic, found in tissue samples during the preparation for burial. A lethal dose administered over several days. Harrison examined the evidence carefully. And you believe Thatcher Voss administered this poison? I believe it aligns with the timing of his visit to the coal ranch, the symptoms Ralston exhibited, and Voss's subsequent actions regarding the property, Craven replied cautiously. But I cannot testify directly to who administered it. Ralston's journal detailed his suspicions, Vanessa added. Unfortunately, Voss's men seized it during their raid on our ranch. The courthouse bell began to toll, signaling the approach of 2 o'clock, the time set for James's trial. Vanessa felt panic rising. Colonel, please, she urged. Whatever you decide about the other matters, you must stop this mockery of a trial. James deserves a proper military hearing, not a rushed proceeding designed to silence him. Harrison rose, his decision apparently made. Lieutenant Chambers, assemble the men, full dress uniform. He turned to Vanessa. Mrs. McCallan, Dr. Craven, you'll accompany us to the courthouse. Say nothing unless I direct you to speak. Is that clear? They nodded, hope and apprehension mingling as they followed the colonel from the hotel room. Outside, Harrison's detachment of 20 cavalry soldiers awaited, mounted and alert. The remaining guard Voss had posted was nowhere to be seen, presumably drawn away by the fire Jenkins had started. What exactly do you intend, Colonel? Vanessa asked as they walked briskly toward the courthouse. To assert federal military authority in a case that rightfully belongs under military jurisdiction, Harrison replied simply. The charges against Lieutenant Montgomery stem from actions taken during wartime, while he was serving under military command. Civilian territorial courts have no standing in this matter. It was a legal maneuver Voss might not have anticipated, not an intervention based on the merits of the case, but on jurisdiction. A procedural objection that even a corrupt judge like Morrison would find difficult to dismiss when backed by armed federal troops. The courthouse square was packed with spectators when they arrived. News of James Montgomery's capture and trial had drawn what seemed like the entire population of Helena. Some came out of curiosity, others from a thirst for spectacle, and more than a few, Vanessa suspected, had been paid by Voss to ensure the right atmosphere for what was intended to be a foregone conclusion. Harrison's uniformed soldiers created a path through the crowd. Whispers spread as people recognized the federal troops, the colonel's commanding presence drawing all eyes. Inside the courthouse, the scene was equally crowded. Judge Morrison presided from the bench, his expression souring visibly when Harrison and his detachment entered. James stood in the dock, his face bruised, his posture stiff but unbowed. The Beaumont brothers sat in the front row, their expressions hungry for vengeance. And there, beside the territorial prosecutor, sat Thatcher Voss, immaculate as always, his face a mask of civic concern that didn't reach his cold eyes. Those eyes widened slightly when he spotted Vanessa entering with Harrison. For the first time since she'd known him, Thatcher Voss looked genuinely surprised. What is the meaning of this interruption? Judge Morrison demanded as Harrison approached the bench. Colonel Ethan Harrison, United States Army, Fort Ellis Command, Harrison announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. I am here to claim jurisdiction over the case of Lieutenant James Montgomery, who is charged with actions committed while serving under Union military command during the war between the states. This court has already established jurisdiction, Morrison blustered. The territorial governor has no authority over military personnel being charged with offenses committed during wartime, Harrison interrupted firmly. This is established federal law, Your Honor, as you well know. Morrison's face reddened. The defendant has evaded justice for 12 years. He's a fugitive from an incomplete military investigation that was never properly concluded, Harrison countered. Lieutenant Montgomery will be remanded to military custody pending a proper court-martial proceeding where all evidence can be fairly examined. Voss rose to his feet. This is an outrage. The Beaumont family has waited over a decade for justice. Their sister's blood cries out. Mr. Voss, Harrison said, turning to face him directly, your role in these proceedings is unclear to me. You are neither prosecutor nor family member of the alleged victim. Yet your involvement in this case, and in several related matters, appears extensive. Voss faltered momentarily, then recovered his composure. I am a concerned citizen, Colonel, and a veteran who understands the importance of military honor. Indeed, Harrison replied coolly, a veteran who was captured behind Union lines carrying intelligence in 1864 by Lieutenant Montgomery, as I recall. Murmurs swept through the courtroom. This connection was apparently news to many present, including Judge Morrison, whose expression showed confusion for the first time. Ancient history, Voss dismissed with a wave of his hand, irrelevant to these proceedings. On the contrary, Harrison replied, your personal vendetta against Lieutenant Montgomery creates a significant conflict of interest that taints these entire proceedings. Vendetta? Preposterous. Voss's practiced calm was cracking. I merely seek justice for Elizabeth Beaumont, as do her brothers. And what of justice for Ralston Cole? Harrison asked, his voice deceptively mild. The question hung in the air, unexpected and dangerous. Voss's expression froze. I don't understand your meaning, Colonel. I think you do, Mr. Voss. Harrison turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I have reason to believe that the prosecution of Lieutenant Montgomery is part of a larger pattern of illegal activities designed to acquire the Cole Ranch property, particularly its water rights. These activities include, but are not limited to, the arsenic poisoning of Ralston Cole. Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Judge Morrison pounded his gavel ineffectually as shouts and exclamations drowned out all other sounds. The Beaumont brothers roared, confusion evident on their faces as they looked between Voss and the colonel. Order, Morrison shouted. I will have order. When the noise subsided slightly, he glared at Harrison. Colonel, these are extremely serious accusations with no bearing on the Montgomery case. If you have evidence of a separate crime, it should be presented through proper channels. I agree completely, Harrison replied smoothly, which is why I've dispatched riders to Virginia City with full documentation for the territorial governor's review. In the meantime, Lieutenant Montgomery remains under military jurisdiction and will be remanded to my custody. Voss's face had drained of color, but his voice remained steady. This is an obvious delay tactic, Your Honor. Colonel Harrington has no evidence of any wrongdoing on my part, merely desperate accusations from Montgomery's wife. He gestured dismissively toward Vanessa. Actually, came a new voice from the courtroom entrance. He has this. All heads turned to see Sheriff Heir, whom Vanessa had assumed was aligned with Voss. In his hand was a familiar leather-bound journal, Ralston's diary. Found this hidden in Mr. Voss's office safe when executing a search warrant related to suspicious financial transactions, Heir announced, approaching the bench. Seems odd that Ralston Cole's private journal would be in Mr. Voss's possession, doesn't it? Especially given the incriminating entries it contains. Voss's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. I've never seen that journal before. Sheriff Heir is clearly conspiring with the territorial banking examiner, Heir interrupted, who became quite interested in certain irregularities at Voss Bank, particularly loans called in selectively to pressure ranchers in the Clear Creek watershed. Vanessa could scarcely believe what was happening. Sheriff Heir, whom they'd assumed was firmly in Voss's pocket, had apparently been conducting his own investigation all along. Your Honor, Heir continued, I request that Thatcher Voss be detained pending investigation into the murder of Ralston Cole, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit perjury in the Montgomery case. Judge Morrison looked trapped, his gaze darting between Voss, Harrison, and the packed courtroom. His alliance with Voss was clearly being weighed against the sudden shift in power dynamics. I will take these matters under advisement, he hedged. In the meantime, I acknowledge the military's jurisdiction claim regarding Montgomery. He will be remanded to Colonel Harrison's custody until this jurisdictional question can be properly resolved. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough to save James from immediate execution. 2 soldiers moved to the dock, replacing the territorial marshals who had been guarding him. For the first time since entering the courtroom, James's eyes met Vanessa's, a world of meaning passing between them in that silent exchange. Voss, however, was not finished. As Morrison prepared to adjourn the court, he surged to his feet. This is a conspiracy, he shouted, his careful facade finally crumbling completely. Cole's widow and her lover have fabricated these accusations to steal my rightful water claims. I won't stand for it. Mr. Voss, Harrison said calmly, you are making a scene in a court of law. I suggest you compose yourself. You suggest? Voss's laugh held an edge of hysteria. a one-armed colonel from some frontier outpost suggests? His hand moved toward his coat. Voss, Matthew Beaumont's voice cut through the tension. Is it true about Cole? What does it matter? Voss snapped, his attention momentarily diverted to the elder Beaumont brother. He was an obstacle, like your sister was an obstacle, like Montgomery is an obstacle. The admission, made in a moment of uncalculated rage, silenced the room completely. Even Voss seemed to realize what he'd said, his eyes widening in shock at his own words. My sister, Beaumont repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Elizabeth was an obstacle? That's not what I meant. Voss backpedaled quickly. The situations are entirely different. Are they? Beaumont stepped closer, his expression hardening. 12 years we've hunted Montgomery, believing your account of Elizabeth's death. 12 years of grief and rage, all because you said he used her as a shield, then killed her to silence her. He did, Voss insisted. Montgomery is guilty. Then why, Beaumont asked, pulling a folded paper from his coat. Did I receive this telegram this morning from our cousin in Atlanta, the one who finally located the Confederate soldier who witnessed the shooting? Voss went very still. What telegram? The one stating that Elizabeth was struck by a stray bullet fired from your pistol during your struggle with Montgomery, Beaumont said, his voice thick with emotion. That Montgomery tried to save her. That you invented the story about him using her as a shield to deflect blame from yourself. Voss lunged suddenly, reaching for Beaumont's throat. Give me that telegram. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Sheriff Hale and several deputies moved to restrain Voss, but he fought with unexpected strength, his refined exterior giving way to animal desperation. In the struggle, his hand found his hidden derringer and brought it up, aiming not at Beaumont but at James, who was being led from the dock by Harrison's soldiers. Montgomery, he screamed, this is your doing. The shot rang out deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, but it wasn't Voss's derringer that fired. Matthew Beaumont had drawn his own weapon with the speed of a man who had spent years nursing vengeance, and now that vengeance had found a new target. Voss crumpled, a red stain spreading across his immaculate waistcoat, his face registering nothing but shock as he collapsed to the courthouse floor. Silence fell, broken only by Voss's ragged breathing. Beaumont stood over him, pistol still raised, his face a mask of cold fury. 12 years, he said quietly. 12 years you used our grief, our rage, our need for justice, used Elizabeth's memory to manipulate us into doing your dirty work, made us your hounds to hunt an innocent man. Voss tried to speak, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth, but no coherent words emerged. For Elizabeth, Beaumont said, holstering his weapon, then turning to James with a nod of grim acknowledgement. Lieutenant. Medical attention was summoned for Voss, though it was clear from Dr. Quervin's expression after examining him that the wound was mortal. The banker was carried from the courtroom on a stretcher, his life ebbing away with every labored breath. Judge Morrison, shaken by the violence that had erupted in his courtroom and the sudden collapse of his alliance with Voss, hastily adjourned proceedings. James was escorted out under military guard, not as a prisoner headed for execution, but as an officer whose case would now receive proper review. Vanessa followed, desperate to speak with him, to touch him, and to assure herself that he was truly safe. Colonel Harrison, sensing her need, allowed them a moment together in a side chamber of the courthouse. When the door closed behind them, leaving them alone for the first time since their desperate parting at the ranch, Vanessa found herself suddenly speechless. James looked older, the bruises on his face standing out starkly against his pallor, but his eyes, those quiet, watchful eyes, held the same steadiness they always had. Vanessa, he said softly, breaking the silence first. How did you? She didn't let him finish, closing the distance between them and wrapping her arms around him, heedless of propriety or his injuries. He stiffened momentarily in surprise, then returned the embrace with equal fervor. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered against his chest. When Jenkins said you'd been captured. I thought I'd lost you, he countered, his voice rough with emotion. When they told me the ranch had been burned, that Voss's men had attacked. Pedro, the others? Safe as far as I know, James reassured her. Jenkins found me at the box L just before the marshals arrived. He said you were heading to Helena to find Dr. Kraravin's evidence. Vanessa drew back slightly, looking up at his battered face. Voss took everything, the ranch, the water rights, Ralston's journal, but he didn't account for Kraravin's conscience or Sheriff Hale's investigation. Or the Beaumont brothers learning the truth, James added grimly. I never expected them to turn against Voss. The truth has a way of emerging, Vanessa said softly, no matter how deeply it's buried. James touched her face gently, his calloused fingers tracing her cheek as if memorizing her features. What happens now? The ranch? We'll rebuild, she said with more confidence than she felt. Contest the fraudulent boundary ruling. Replant what was burned. Start again. We, he repeated, a question in his voice. Yes, we, Vanessa affirmed. Unless you want something different, now that you're free of Voss's pursuit, now that your name can be cleared. James Montgomery, once Bridger McCallan, studied her face for a long moment. I've worn many names, fought in many battles, ran from many ghosts, he said finally. But I've only found a peace in one place. His eyes held hers steadily, with one person. The door opened before Vanessa could respond, Lieutenant Chambers appearing with an apologetic expression. Colonel Harrison says it's time, sir. We need to move you to secure quarters at Fort Ellis until the court-martial can be arranged. James nodded, reluctantly releasing Vanessa. How long? The colonel estimates several weeks to gather all relevant witnesses and documentation, Chambers replied, especially with Voss unlikely to survive to testify. Several weeks, Vanessa echoed, disappointment evident in her voice. James took her hand. I've waited 12 years for justice, Vanessa. A few more weeks to secure it properly seems a small price. He smiled slightly. And it will give you time to decide what you truly want, once this is all over. I already know what I want, she replied without hesitation. I just didn't expect to find it in a marriage that began as convenience. His eyes softened, but before he could respond, Chambers cleared his throat meaningfully. Sir, we really must go. With a final squeeze of her hand, James allowed himself to be led away, leaving Vanessa standing in the empty chamber, her mind already turning to the challenges ahead. The ranch would need rebuilding, the water rights contested, their future reimagined from the ashes of what Voss had destroyed. But first, there was Voss himself to deal with, hanging on to life by a thread, but still dangerous as long as he drew breath. For while Matthew Beaumont's bullet had exacted one form of justice, the full accounting of Thatcher Voss's crimes remained incomplete. Ralston's murder, the stolen land, the corrupted officials, all of it needed to be dragged into the light if true justice was to be served. And Vanessa Cole McCallan, or perhaps soon-to-be Montgomery, was determined to see it through. For Ralston, for James, for herself, and for the land they had all fought to protect. As she emerged from the courthouse into the late afternoon sunlight, Vanessa found Almeida waiting, concern etched on her weathered face. They've taken him to Fort Ellis? The older woman asked. Vanessa nodded. For his protection, until the court-martial. And Voss? Dying, according to Dr. Kraravin, but not fast enough for my liking. Almeida's expression hardened. Men like Voss rarely pay for all their sins in this world, but at least he'll face some justice before meeting his maker. It's not enough, Vanessa said quietly. Not for Ralston, not for everything he's destroyed. Maybe not, Almeida conceded, but it's a beginning. She touched Vanessa's arm gently. Come on, let's find Jenkins and figure out our next steps. We've got a ranch to reclaim and a life to rebuild. As they walked away from the courthouse, neither woman noticed the figure watching from an upper window. Judge Morrison, his face troubled as he considered the swift and violent fall of the man whose bribes had kept him in power for so long. The territorial judge had decisions to make, alliances to reconsider, a career to salvage if possible. And in the Helena Hotel, Colonel Harrison was drafting telegrams to his superiors in Washington, detailing the corruption he'd uncovered and requesting authority to conduct a full investigation into territorial governance. The events in that courtroom had revealed rot that went beyond one banker's vendetta, extending into the very institutions meant to bring civilization to the frontier. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across Helena's streets. In a town built on gold, blood had proven once again to be the currency that truly mattered. And in its wake would come either justice or deeper corruption, a question that remained to be answered in the days ahead. For Vanessa, the immediate future held uncertainty, hardship, and difficult choices. But it also held something she had not expected to find in her marriage of convenience, the possibility of genuine love, built on shared struggle and mutual respect. A partnership forged in fire, tested by adversity, and perhaps, just perhaps, strong enough to withstand whatever challenges still awaited them. Thatcher Voss died 3 days after Matthew Beaumont's bullet found his heart. He never regained consciousness, never confessed to his crimes, never faced the justice Vanessa had hoped to see delivered in a proper courtroom. Dr. Kraravin pronounced his passing with clinical detachment, noting only that death comes for all men, regardless of their wealth or power. Word spread quickly through Helena and the surrounding territory. Some mourned, those who had benefited from Voss's patronage or feared the vacuum his death would create. Others celebrated quietly, particularly the ranchers and farmers who had suffered under his financial manipulations. Most simply absorbed the news with the stoic pragmatism of frontier folk, then returned to the business of survival. For Vanessa, Voss's death brought neither satisfaction nor closure. The banker was beyond earthly punishment now, but his legacy of destruction remained. Her home damaged, her land's water rights stolen through legal machinations, and her husband still facing a military court-martial at Fort Ellis. A week after the courthouse shooting, Vanessa sat at Almeida's kitchen table, poring over legal documents spread before her. The older woman placed a steaming cup of coffee at her elbow. "You've been at those papers since dawn," Almeida observed. "Found anything useful?" "Maybe." Vanessa indicated a section of territorial law she'd marked. "There's precedent for invalidating property rulings made under corrupt influence. If we can prove Morrison was bribed by Voss, well, that won't be easy with Voss dead," Almeida pointed out. "No, but not impossible." Vanessa sipped the strong coffee. "Sheriff Hale found financial records in Voss's office safe. Regular payments to Morrison dating back 3 years. Still circumstantial, could claim they were legitimate business dealings." The debate was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Hale himself, his expression more grave than usual as he dismounted outside Almeida's cabin. "Morning, ladies," he greeted, removing his hat as he entered. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Almeida assured him. "Coffee?" Hale accepted the offered cup gratefully. "Rode all night from Helena. Thought you should hear this directly from me." Vanessa tensed. "Is it James? Has something happened at Fort Ellis?" "Lieutenant Montgomery is fine," Hale assured her. "It's about Judge Morrison. He's dead." The blunt announcement hung in the air like gunsmoke. "Dead?" Almeida repeated. "How?" "Found him in his chambers this morning. Empty whiskey bottle, empty laudanum vial." Hale's expression was unreadable. "Left a note." "Suicide," Vanessa breathed. Hale nodded. "And confession. Full admission of taking bribes from Voss, falsifying land records, manipulating boundary disputes. Specifically mentioned the coal ranch water rights as being fraudulently reassigned. The implications struck Vanessa like a physical force. Then the ruling was illegal. The water rights are still ours. "According to territorial law, yes," Hale confirmed. "Once the governor reviews Morrison's confession, the fraudulent ruling should be invalidated, including the boundary change affecting Clear Creek." It was the first genuine good news in weeks, yet Vanessa found herself troubled by the timing. Why now? Why would Morrison confess and take his own life when Voss can no longer threaten him? Guilt, maybe, Hale suggested, or fear that the banking examiner's investigation would uncover his corruption anyway. Or someone else pressured him, Almeida said quietly. Someone who stood to gain from Voss's operations being dismantled. Hale's expression suggested he'd had similar thoughts. Voss Bank is failing, deposits being withdrawn, loans called in by the Territorial Banking Authority. There's talk that First Helena Bank will acquire the assets. Owned by the Harrington family, Vanessa noted, Voss's chief competitors. Business can be as brutal as war, Hale observed, sometimes more so. Whatever forces had driven Morrison to his desperate act, the result was the same. The legal foundation for Voss's theft of the coal ranch water rights had crumbled. The first step toward reclaiming what was rightfully hers. There's more, Hale continued, setting down his coffee cup. Governors appointed a special investigator to review all of Voss's dealings and Morrison's rulings. Man named Lawrence Harrington. Harrington? Almeida's eyebrows rose. As in First Helena Bank Harrington? His younger brother, Hale confirmed. Harvard-educated lawyer, reputation for honesty, arrived in Helena yesterday. Vanessa considered this development. Will he be fair? His family stands to gain from Voss's downfall. Fair enough, I'd wager, Hale replied. He's requested you come to Helena tomorrow. Wants your testimony about the Clear Creek boundary dispute and any other matters involving Voss and Morrison. After Hale's departure, Vanessa and Almeida discussed the implications well into the evening. The unexpected death of Judge Morrison had changed everything, potentially clearing the path for justice, but also raising new questions about power dynamics in the territory. Be careful with this, Harrington, Almeida cautioned as they prepared for bed. Just because he's investigating Voss doesn't mean he's on your side. Might just be one predator moving in after another is taken down. I know, Vanessa agreed, but this is our best chance to reclaim what's ours. I have to take it. Sleep eluded her that night. Her mind returned repeatedly to James, isolated at Fort Ellis, preparing for a court-martial that would determine not just his legal fate, but his very identity. Would he emerge as James Montgomery, his name cleared, his past reclaimed? Or would he remain Bridger McCallan, the quiet ranch hand who had become her husband through circumstance, but had somehow claimed a place in her heart? And what did she truly want? The question that had seemed so clear in the emotional aftermath of the courthouse confrontation now revealed its complexity in the quiet darkness. Their marriage had begun as a practical arrangement, evolved into a partnership against a common enemy, and only briefly, for one night, hinted at something deeper. Was that enough to build a future on, once the immediate dangers had passed? Dawn found her still wrestling with these questions as she prepared for the journey to Helena. Lawrence Harrington was not what Vanessa had expected. Rather than the austere banker's brother she had imagined, she found a man in his early 30s with an open countenance and direct manner that put her immediately at ease. His office in the Territorial Administration Building was spartanly furnished, suggesting a temporary occupant rather than someone establishing a power base. Mrs. McCallan, he greeted her, rising from behind his desk. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. Vanessa took the offered chair, studying him carefully. Sheriff Hale said you wanted my testimony about Judge Morrison's rulings. And about Thatcher Voss, Harrington confirmed, retrieving a folder from a nearby cabinet. I've been appointed to untangle a rather complex web of corruption, it seems. Where would you like me to begin? With Clear Creek, he replied, opening the folder to reveal a detailed survey map. I understand this boundary dispute was central to Voss's interest in your property. For the next 2 hours, Vanessa provided a comprehensive account of Voss's systematic campaign to acquire the coal ranch, from his initial offers after Ralston's death, to the manipulation of the will's condition, to the fraudulent boundary ruling that stole their water rights. She detailed Dr. Craven's arsenic evidence, Sheriff Hale's discovery of Ralston's journal in Voss's safe, and the revelation of the banker's role in Elizabeth Beaumont's death. Harrington took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but otherwise allowing her narrative to unfold without interruption. When she finally finished, he sat back, his expression thoughtful. A remarkable story, Mrs. McCallan, and consistent with evidence I've gathered from other sources. He produced another document from the folder, including this. Vanessa recognized it immediately, Ralston's journal, which she had thought lost. Where did you get this? Sheriff Hale recovered it from Voss's office safe, Harrington explained. It contains detailed accounts of Voss's visit before your first husband's illness, along with his suspicions about poisoning. Those entries are what prompted us to seek Dr. Craven's evidence, Vanessa confirmed. Ralston suspected Voss had poisoned him, but had no proof. We have proof now, Harrington said grimly. Dr. Craven's arsenic samples have been verified by 3 independent chemists. Combined with Morrison's confession and the financial records showing payments from Voss Bank to the judge, we have established a clear pattern of criminal activity. Relief washed over Vanessa. Then the water rights ruling will be invalidated? It already has been, Harrington confirmed, sliding a document across the desk. This morning I signed the order restoring the original boundaries of the coal ranch as established in the 1806 land grant, Clear Creek is rightfully yours again, Mrs. McCallan. Vanessa stared at the official document, its territorial seal and Harrington's signature confirming the restoration of what Voss had stolen. After months of struggle, of loss, of fighting against seemingly insurmountable odds, this simple piece of paper represented the first concrete victory. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me," Harrington replied. "I'm simply correcting an injustice that should never have occurred." He hesitated, then added, "There is, however, another matter we need to discuss. Your husband's situation." Vanessa tensed. "The court-martial." "Yes, as you know, Colonel Harrison has claimed military jurisdiction over Lieutenant Montgomery's case, removing it from territorial authority. This was legally correct, but creates certain complications." "What kind of complications?" "The Beaumont brothers have withdrawn their accusations regarding their sister's death," Harrington explained. "Matthew Beaumont has provided a sworn affidavit stating that new evidence exonerates Montgomery and implicates Voss. That should resolve the murder charge." "That's good news," Vanessa said cautiously, sensing there was more. "However, there remains the matter of Lieutenant Montgomery's disappearance after Atlanta, his assumption of a false identity, and his failure to report for the military inquiry that was scheduled after the war." Harrington's expression was sympathetic but firm. "These are serious military infractions, Mrs. McCallan." "He was being hunted by the Beaumont brothers," Vanessa protested. "He feared for his life." "A reasonable fear," Harrington acknowledged, "and a mitigating factor certainly, but not a complete defense under military law." "What are you saying?" Harrington leaned forward, his manner becoming more personal. "I've spoken with Colonel Harrison about Lieutenant Montgomery's case. The colonel believes there is a path forward that serves justice without destroying your husband's future." "What path?" Vanessa asked, hope and apprehension mingling. "A negotiated resolution," Harrington replied. "Montgomery pleads guilty to the lesser charge of failing to report for duty, accepts a dishonorable discharge, and forfeits any back pay or pension rights. In exchange, the more serious charges of desertion and false identity would be dropped. He would be free to return to civilian life without fear of military prosecution." "As James Montgomery or Bridger McCallan?" Vanessa asked, the question that had been haunting her finally spoken aloud. "That would be his choice," Harrington said gently. "The military would have no further claim on either identity. It was a resolution that offered freedom, if not complete vindication. James would avoid imprisonment, would be able to return to the ranch to her, but at the cost of his military honor, of the name and reputation he had once valued highly enough to risk his life defending." "I'll need to discuss this with him," Vanessa said finally. "It's his decision to make, not mine." "Of course," Harrington agreed. "Colonel Harrison has granted permission for you to visit Fort Ellis tomorrow. A military escort will accompany you." As Vanessa rose to leave, Harrington added, "One more thing, Mrs. McCallan. Regarding the coal ranch itself." She paused, suddenly apprehensive again. "Yes?" "The banking examiner's investigation revealed that Voss Bank held the mortgage on your property, acquired from the original lender shortly after your first husband's death." This was not news to Vanessa. Voss had used the mortgage as another point of leverage against her. "As part of the resolution of Voss Bank's affairs," Harrington continued, "all outstanding loans are being reviewed. Some will be acquired by other institutions, others modified or foreclosed upon." The implication was clear. Even with the water rights restored, she might still lose the ranch if the mortgage was called due. "I don't have the funds to pay off the mortgage," Vanessa admitted. "The ranch has barely been operating these past months." Harrington nodded, unsurprised. "I anticipated as much." He produced yet another document from his seemingly inexhaustible folder. "This might interest you." It was a mortgage satisfaction notice, marked "Paid in Full" in bold red letters across the front. "I don't understand," Vanessa said, confused. "Who paid it?" "The document was found in Voss's safe," Harrington explained, "dated 2 days before his death, but never filed with the county recorder. It appears he had already received payment in full, though from whom is unclear." "That's impossible," Vanessa protested. "We never paid him. We couldn't have." "Nevertheless, the debt is officially satisfied," Harrington said, his tone suggesting he found the situation as curious as she did. "The coal ranch is free and clear of all encumbrances." As Vanessa left the territorial offices, her mind reeled with the day's developments. The water rights restored, the mortgage mysteriously paid, a potential resolution for James's legal troubles. It was almost too much to process. After months of unrelenting struggle, fortune had suddenly turned in their favor with bewildering speed. The question was, one, what forces were at work behind these unexpected developments? The answer, or at least part of it, awaited her at the Helena Hotel, where Almeida had arranged rooms for their stay. As Vanessa entered the lobby, a familiar figure rose from one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. John Lockhart, the rancher who had stood with them against Voss. Mrs. McCallan, he greeted her, his weathered face revealing nothing. Might I have a word in private? In the hotel's small dining room, relatively empty at mid-afternoon, Lockhart finally explained his presence. Heard you met with Harrington today, he began, declining anything stronger than coffee despite the hour. Got good news about the water rights, I expect. Yes, Vanessa confirmed, and about the mortgage as well, though that part remains a mystery. Lockhart nodded, seeming unsurprised. No mystery. Ranchers Association paid it off. Vanessa stared at him, stunned. The association? But why? Call it an investment in territorial justice, Lockhart replied with a slight shrug. Or insurance against future Thatcher Vosses. Man like that gets too much power. Everyone suffers, eventually. But the amount, it must have been substantial. 20 ranchers, each putting in their share, Lockhart explained. Not so much when divided that way. And worth every cent to ensure Clear Creek stays in the right hands. Vanessa was overwhelmed by this revelation. The Ranchers Association, men she barely knew who owed her nothing, had collectively paid off her mortgage to ensure Voss's influence couldn't reach beyond the grave. I don't know how to thank you all, she said finally. Don't need thanks, Lockhart assured her. Just good stewardship of the land and water. Ralston understood that. Expect Montgomery does too. You know about the court-martial resolution? Vanessa asked, surprised. Been working with Colonel Harrison on it, Lockhart admitted. Man deserves a chance to live without looking over his shoulder after all he's been through. The pieces were falling into place. Lockhart and the ranchers hadn't just helped financially. They'd been advocating for James behind the scenes, using their collective influence to counterbalance the power Voss had wielded for so long. There's something else you should know, Lockhart added, his expression softening slightly. About Ralston. What about him? Man knew he was dying before Voss's poison ever touched him, Lockhart said quietly. Cancer, most likely. Doctor and Bozeman told him 6 months at best. That's why he changed his will, why he brought Montgomery back from my ranch. Was setting things in order, making sure you'd be protected. This revelation struck Vanessa to her core. Ralston had known he was dying, had made arrangements not to control her from beyond the grave, as she'd initially thought, but to ensure she would have both the legal right to the land and a protector who understood the threats facing her. He never told me, she whispered. Man had his pride, Lockhart replied simply. Didn't want your last months together, shadowed by what was coming. Figured he'd tell you when he had to. He paused. Voss robbed him of that chance. The weight of this knowledge settled over Vanessa like a heavy blanket. Ralston had loved her enough to face death alone, to make difficult preparations without burdening her with his prognosis. And in James Montgomery, he had chosen a successor who embodied the qualities he most valued: courage, integrity, and loyalty to the land. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. It changes how I see things. Lockhart nodded, understanding in his eyes. Thought it might. He rose to leave. Best of luck at Fort Ellis tomorrow. Montgomery's a good man, whatever name he chooses to wear. After Lockhart's departure, Vanessa spent a restless evening in her hotel room, reviewing all that had transpired and preparing for the journey to Fort Ellis in the morning. The military escort Harrington had promised arrived at dawn, 2 young soldiers who treated her with formal courtesy as they helped her mount the horse they had brought for her use. The ride to the fort took most of the day, the miles passing beneath steady hoofbeats as they traveled northeastward from Helena. Fort Ellis stood on a plateau overlooking the Gallatin Valley, its wooden palisade and parade ground visible from miles away, an outpost of federal authority in the still wild Montana territory. Colonel Harrison received her personally, his one-armed salute as crisp as any 2-armed version could be. Mrs. McCallan, welcome to Fort Ellis. I trust your journey was comfortable? As comfortable as a 30-mile ride can be, Vanessa replied with a smile that belied her exhaustion and nerves. Thank you for allowing this visit. Lieutenant Montgomery has been a model detainee, Harrison assured her, as he escorted her across the parade ground, confined to quarters rather than the guardhouse, given his cooperation and standing. Has he been informed of the proposed resolution? Vanessa asked. Only in general terms, Harrison replied. I thought the specifics might best come from you. They stopped outside a small officer's quarters at the far end of the row. I'll leave you to your discussion, Harrison said. Take whatever time you need. My adjutant will escort you back to my office when you're ready to discuss next steps. Vanessa's heart pounded as Harrison departed and she faced the closed door. Behind it waited the man who had entered her life as Bridger McCallan, revealed himself as James Montgomery, and somehow become essential to her future regardless of which name he claimed. She knocked softly. Enter, came the familiar voice. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light, still and watchful as always. But he wore a Union officer's uniform now, not the full dress version, but the simpler field uniform that suited his lean frame and practical nature. It transformed him somehow, connecting the quiet ranch hand she had known with the military man he had once been. Vanessa, he said softly, crossing the room in long strides to take her hands in his. You're here. I'm here, she confirmed, drinking in the sight of him. The bruises from his capture had faded, and his face appeared more rested than she had seen it in months. You look well. Better accommodations than I expected, he admitted with a slight smile. Colonel Harrison has been surprisingly hospitable for a jailer. Not a jailer for much longer, I hope, Vanessa replied. I've spoken with Lawrence Harrington, the special investigator. There's a resolution on the table for your case. James gestured to the small table and chairs in the center of the room. Tell me. As they sat, Vanessa outlined the proposed settlement, a guilty plea to the lesser charge, dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of military benefits, but freedom from further prosecution. She watched his face carefully as she explained, trying to gauge his reaction to each element. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on some distant point beyond the window. A dishonorable discharge, he said finally. Not how I imagined my military service would end. Is military honor still so important to you? Vanessa asked gently. After all this time? It was once the only thing that defined me, he replied. Before Atlanta, before Elizabeth Beaumont, before becoming Bridger McCallan. I was Lieutenant James Montgomery of the 107th Ohio. That meant something. It still does, Vanessa assured him. The charges that truly mattered, Elizabeth's death, the accusations of using her as a shield, those have been withdrawn. The Beaumont brothers know the truth now. But not the Army, James said. Not officially. I'll still go into the records as dishonorably discharged. Vanessa hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting her. Does it matter more than what we've built together? His eyes snapped back to her face, surprise evident in his expression. Is that what you think? That I'd choose military vindication over you? Over us? I don't know, she admitted. We never really had the chance to discuss what us means, beyond the arrangement we made to save the ranch. James reached across the table to take her hand. Vanessa, I agreed to the marriage to honor my debt to Ralston, yes. But that night, our only night together before everything fell apart, changed things for me. Surely you felt it too. The vulnerability in his question touched her deeply. I did, she acknowledged. But so much has happened since then. Voss's death, the ranch being attacked, Morrison's suicide, it's all been so overwhelming. I wasn't sure if what we started had any chance to grow. If you want it to, he said carefully, I believe it can. Even with all the complications, the ranch to rebuild, your legal situation, the fact that we barely know each other outside of crisis. James smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually solemn features. I'd say facing Thatcher Voss together counts as getting to know each other pretty thoroughly. His expression sobered. But you're right, there's more to building a life together than fighting common enemies. The question is whether you want to train. I do, Vanessa said simply, but I need to know who I'm building that life with. James Montgomery or Bridger McCallan? It was the fundamental question, finally spoken aloud, the choice of identity that would shape their future. James was silent for a long moment, considering. I've been both men for so long that sometimes the line blurs, he admitted. Lieutenant Montgomery died a little each day during the war, seeing things no man should see, doing things that haunt me still. Bridger McCallan was born from his ashes, simpler, quieter, but never fully free of the past. And now, Vanessa pressed gently, now I think perhaps there's a third option, he said. Not completely Montgomery, not completely McCallan, but someone new. Someone who carries the best parts of both, who has learned from their mistakes and their strengths. His eyes met hers directly. Someone who loves you, whatever name he wears. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, more powerful for its lack of embellishment. Not flowery romance or practiced seduction, but the straightforward truth of a man who had spent years hiding his true self and was finally completely exposed. I love you too, Vanessa replied, the words coming easily now that they had been invited. And I'll stand with you, whatever you decide about the military's offer. Relief and joy transformed his features. Then I'll take their deal, he decided. The dishonorable discharge, the forfeiture of pay, none of it matters compared to being free to build a life with you, to rebuild the ranch, to make it a home again. It already is a home, Vanessa said softly, wherever you are. As the afternoon light slanted through the window, gilding the simple room with warmth, they spoke of practical matters. The restored water rights, the mysteriously paid mortgage, the Ranchers Association's involvement. James listened with growing amazement as she recounted Lockhart's revelations. So they united against Voss, he marveled. Men who normally can't agree on grazing rights or water access, coming together to ensure one banker didn't control the territory. For their own interests as much as ours, Vanessa pointed out. But yes, it's remarkable. And Ralston knew he was dying, James added, his expression sobering. That explains so much about his final months. The urgency, the changes to his will, bringing me back from Lockhart's ranch. He was trying to protect me, Vanessa said softly, to ensure I wouldn't face Voss alone. He succeeded, James affirmed, though not in the way he might have expected. As evening approached, Colonel Harrison returned to discuss the formal arrangements for James's plea and discharge. The process would take several days to complete, with paperwork to be filed in triplicate and formal statements to be recorded. You're welcome to remain at Fort Ellis during the proceedings, Mrs. McCallan, Harrison offered. We have guest quarters available for officers' wives. The designation, officer's wife, struck Vanessa with unexpected force. For all that had happened, all they had endured together, she and James had never truly inhabited the roles of husband and wife in any normal sense. They had been allies, partners in survival, and briefly, passionately, lovers. But the daily rhythms of marriage, the quiet intimacies of shared life, remain largely unexplored territory. Thank you, Colonel, she accepted. I'd like that very much. That night in the simple guest quarters assigned to her, Vanessa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From widow to reluctant bride, from desperate landowner to fighter against corruption, she had been transformed by circumstances beyond her control. Yet somehow, through all the loss and struggle, she had found not just survival, but the possibility of genuine happiness. The next morning brought the formal proceedings. James's plea entered into the military record, the discharge papers prepared, statements taken about the Elizabeth Beaumont incident to officially clear his name of the murder charge, if not the military infractions. 3 days later, it was done. James Montgomery, formerly Lieutenant, 107th Ohio Infantry, was officially discharged from the United States Army. The dishonorable designation stung, visible in the tightening around his eyes as he signed the final papers, but he accepted it with the same quiet dignity with which he had faced all the challenges of the past months. You're free to go, Mr. Montgomery, Colonel Harrison said, offering his hand. Or is it McCallan now? James glanced at Vanessa before answering. Montgomery McCallan, I think, honoring both parts of who I am. The hyphenated name was unexpected, but somehow perfect. A bridge between his past and his future, acknowledging both the soldier he had been and the rancher he had become. As they prepared to depart Fort Ellis the following morning, Colonel Harrison presented them with an unexpected gift, a military escort to accompany them back to the coal ranch, ensuring their safe return to land that had stood abandoned since the attack. Consider it the Army's way of making amends for the incomplete investigation 12 years ago, Harrison explained. Had we been more thorough then, perhaps you wouldn't have had to endure all that followed. The journey home took 2 days. The pace set by the supply wagon Harrison had included with the escort, loaded with provisions, tools, and building materials to help them begin the process of rebuilding. When they crested the final ridge overlooking the ranch, Vanessa felt her breath catch. The main house still stood, though signs of the attack were visible in broken windows and scorched walls. The barn remained a charred ruin, the corral only partially standing. Yet with the soft light of late afternoon gilding the scene, there was a strange beauty to it. The resilience of structures that had weathered violence and still remained, damaged but not destroyed. Much like the people who called them home. It's going to be a lot of work, James observed quietly, reining in beside her. Yes, Vanessa agreed, but we faced worse. As they rode down into the valley that held the coal ranch, now the Montgomery McAllen ranch, she supposed, Vanessa noticed movement near the remains of the barn. A familiar figure emerged, waving enthusiastically. Pedro, she called, relieved and delighted to see the loyal ranch hand had survived and returned. He's here! And behind him, emerging from what appeared to be a newly constructed lean-to, came Almeida Rowe, hands on hips, supervising the Mexicans' work with her characteristic directness. Looks like we already have a welcoming committee, James observed, a smile warming his voice, and a construction crew. Indeed, as they drew closer, they could see that work had already begun. Debris cleared away, lumber stacked for repairs, a new well pump installed. Someone had been preparing for their return. The Ranchers Association again, you think? Vanessa asked. Them or Almeida's force of will, James replied with a chuckle. That woman could probably rebuild the entire place single-handed if she set her mind to it. As they reached the yard, Almeida strode forward to meet them, her weathered face splitting into a rare, full smile. About time you two showed up. Been wondering if I'd have to finish this place myself before winter. Almeida, Vanessa greeted her, dismounting to embrace the older woman. How did you know we'd be returning today? Didn't, Almeida admitted. Been here 3 days already, getting things started. Pedro came back last week, found me at my place. Said if you were coming home, the ranch should look like someone cared for it. Vanessa was touched beyond words. While she and James had been at Fort Ellis, their friends had taken it upon themselves to begin the restoration, ensuring they wouldn't return to complete desolation. The creek's running clear, Almeida reported as they walked toward the house. Water rights are good. Lockhart sent over 20 head of cattle to get you started again. Said to consider it payment for grazing rights along the eastern section. That's generous, James observed. Almeida snorted. Man owns 10,000 acres and 5,000 head. It's a drop in his bucket, but it's a start for you. As they reached the porch, Vanessa noticed something she hadn't seen from a distance. A new sign, carved from pine and mounted beside the door. It read simply, Montgomery McAllen Ranch, Ascent, 1876. You're doing? She asked Almeida, gesturing to the sign. The older woman shook her head. Pedro's work. Boy's got hidden talents. The Mexican ducked his head modestly. Thought you might want new name, new beginning. James studied the sign, clearly moved by the simple gesture of acceptance. It's perfect. Thank you, Pedro. As they entered the house, dusty but largely intact with signs of Almeida's recent cleaning efforts evident, Vanessa felt a sense of homecoming more powerful than she had expected. Despite all that had happened, despite the losses and battles and narrow escapes, this place remained the center of her world. Now, with James beside her, with friends who had demonstrated their loyalty in the most meaningful ways, she could begin to imagine a future here that held more than mere survival. That evening, after the soldiers had set up their camp nearby and Almeida had produced a surprisingly substantial meal from seemingly limited resources, Vanessa and James stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Quite a view, James observed. Worth fighting for. Worth living for, Vanessa corrected gently. The fighting's done, I hope. He smiled, drawing her into the circle of his arms. For now, at least. Though I expect life in this territory will always involve some form of struggle, as long as we face it together, she said, settling against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. Together, he agreed, his voice a rumble she felt as much as heard. No more running, no more hiding, no more desperate arrangements. Just us, building something real. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Vanessa Cole Montgomery McCallan contemplated the strange path that had led her here. To this man, this place, this moment of hard-won peace. Ralston had given her the land, had even, in his way, given her James. But what they built from here would be entirely their own creation. The challenges ahead were substantial: rebuilding the ranch, re-establishing their cattle operation, navigating the complexities of their still new relationship outside the pressure of immediate crisis. Yet for the first time in months, those challenges seemed like opportunities rather than burdens, chances to create rather than merely survive. "What are you thinking?" James asked, sensing her contemplative mood. "That Ralston would be pleased," she replied honestly, "seeing the land in good hands, seeing us together. It's what he wanted in the end." "And what do you want?" James asked, turning her gently to face him in the gathering darkness. "Now that you're free to choose, not just react." Vanessa considered the question, its simplicity belying its depth. After months of fighting for mere survival, of rewards to threats and crises, the luxury of wanting, of actively choosing a future rather than just avoiding destruction, seemed almost foreign. "I want this land to thrive again," she said finally. "I want to build something lasting, something that matters. And I want to do it with you, day by day, season by season, without Voss's shadow hanging over us." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "A good beginning." "What about you?" she asked. "After years of hiding, of being someone else, what does James Montgomery McCallan want for himself?" His answer came without hesitation. "Peace, a place to belong, work that matters." He touched her face gently. "And you, Vanessa, always you." In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the lonesome sound echoing across the prairie, a reminder of the wild, unforgiving land that surrounded them. But on the porch of the house that had withstood fire and violence, in the arms of the man who had journeyed from soldier to ranch hand to husband, Vanessa felt not isolation but connection. This land, once called the dead man's land by those who thought Ralston's claim would fail, had become something else entirely, a place of resurrection, of second chances, of new beginnings built on the foundations of the past. As James lowered his head to kiss her, his lips warm despite the cooling night air, Vanessa knew with certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced Thatcher Voss, together drawing strength from each other and from the land they had fought so hard to claim. Not just a dead man's land anymore, but theirs, hard-won, blood-purchased, and finally, rightfully theirs, the end.